Well, hello there. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn as Invincible with Superman Powers, Part 2. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Mark soared through the vast expanse of space, his body weightless yet completely in control of every movement. He had dreamed of what it would feel like to fly through space with his own body in his past life, and now, as he followed closely behind his father, the reality was even more surreal than he had imagined. There was no friction, no resistance, just an endless void stretching infinitely in all directions. He didn't feel anything surrounding him and didn't hear anything besides his own thoughts and his father's presence beside him. Space should have been cold and suffocating, but his bioelectric aura shielded him from all of it, keeping him insulated from the harshness of the vacuum. Though he knew his body could withstand the harshness on its own. Yet, something about how he was flying made him pause. He wasn't even actively using his bioelectric aura to propel himself forward. His natural Viltrumite flight was creating leverage that carried him effortlessly, allowing him to maneuver at speeds unimaginable to humans. But how exactly was that possible? He pondered over it. Just how did Viltrumites fly? Unlike Kryptonians, who manipulated the solar energy within their bodies to create a pseudo-telekinetic aura around themselves, Viltrumites didn't need sunlight or any external force. They simply moved, as if gravity and inertia bent to their will. He focused inward, analyzing the sensation of flight while still keeping pace with his father. His theory? It probably came down to Viltrumites' smart atoms. Maybe they subconsciously manipulated their personal gravitational and magnetic fields at all times, allowing them to move effortlessly through space. Perhaps they even altered their density on a whim, increasing their weight when needed to add more force to their attacks or gain more momentum. This could explain how they could shift directions midair without an external force, or how they applied pressure to thin air, as if creating invisible surfaces to push off from. It was just a theory, but it made sense. Something to think about later. Right now, he had a beating to dish out to a couple of Viltrumites. He refocused his senses. They were approaching the Viltrumite ship, an ominous behemoth stationed near one of Neptune's moons. He saw 4 figures exit the ship, all clad in traditional Viltrumite uniforms, white, with the men having their signature mustaches standing proudly over their hardened expressions. Mark recognized them. General Craig, Thula, Lucan, and Anissa. He silently assessed them. His father could definitely handle both Thula and Lucan on his own, but if Anissa or Craig assisted as well, it would tip the battle in their favor. As for himself, he would have no trouble dealing with practically all 4 of them on his own. Before reaching the ship, Mark casually lifted his hand and snapped his fingers, casting a two-way telepathic link between him and his father. "Dad, this link should help us communicate since we don't have the Coalition communication implants." Omniman tilted his head slightly, feeling the connection before nodding. "Impressive. That's magic, isn't it?" "Yep. Useful, huh?" "It is." Nolan's gaze hardened as he studied the approaching Viltrumites. "How do you want to handle this?" "We talk first," Mark replied. "But if they don't listen? We beat the crap out of them. Like how I did to you." Nolan grunted. "Normally, I'd tell you to fight to kill, but in this case, you're probably right. They won't go down easy, but you're much stronger than me. Just make sure you put them down hard. Viltrumites can heal from wounds that would incapacitate or kill a normal human." "Got it." The 2 of them came to a stop in front of the 4 Viltrumites, both sides floating in the void of space. Craig was at the forefront, his arms crossed over his broad chest as he regarded Nolan with an unreadable expression. "I have heard many tales of the great Nolan Grayson." Craig spoke through his telepathic transmission implant, his voice laced with disappointment. "Centuries of battle. Planets conquered. And yet, this is how you want your legacy to end? As a traitor?" Mark narrowed his eyes, but he let his father speak first. Nolan met Craig's gaze unflinchingly. "Yes. I defected. And there are many reasons why." Craig glanced at Mark. "Because of him?" Nolan didn't hesitate. "Yes. And because I learned to appreciate Earth's way of life in a way I never did on other planets. I fell in love. I had a son. and I couldn't bring myself to destroy the world where I found those things. Lucan let out a snarl, his muscles tensing. Traitor! He spat, preparing to lunge. Craig snapped out his arm, gripping Lucan's shoulder with a silent warning glare. The younger Viltrumite stiffened but obeyed. Craig turned back to Nolan, his tone almost understanding. Return to your duties, and you will be spared. Given your wife's ability to produce what is essentially a pure-blooded Viltrumite, we may even allow you to keep her. Nolan's eyes darkened. That won't happen. Earth is her home. She would be sad if it were conquered. And I refuse to let you take it. Craig shifted his focus to Mark. If Earth's people are truly compatible with Viltrumite DNA, then they are a necessary asset to the Empire's survival. The planet must fall under our control. Mark's patience was wearing thin. You don't have to conquer it. Anissa, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. According to the data you sent us, Nolan, this planet is riddled with wars, disease, corruption, and stagnation. Under Viltrumite rule, it would thrive. It would become something greater. Mark scoffed. And in return, you'd strip them of their free will. You'd enslave them and prevent their progress. He stared at Anissa directly, his tone sharpening. You ever wonder why the Viltrumites are weak right now? Why the Empire fear outsiders knowing how low our population is? Because eventually, you'll meet a threat you can't beat. You guys are stuck in the past, but humans? They evolve. They adapt. And given time, they could become even better than the Empire. Case in point, Robot in the comics, who secretly ruled Earth making it better, and Dinosaurus, who had many good ideas even if he went about them wrong. Anissa narrowed her eyes. Mark continued, pushing his advantage. The Empire is vulnerable. You barely have 50 of you left, and the coalition of planets is growing stronger. Sooner or later, you'll face a threat you can't defeat. He let his words sink in before delivering the final blow. That's why I plan to take over as the new leader of the Viltrumite Empire. The silence was palpable. Then, Lucan snapped. You think you can take over the Empire? That's treason. He shouted. Mark shrugged. I mean, yeah. Lucan lunged towards Mark, but Nolan moved. In a blur, he intercepted Lucan, driving a fist into his throat. Lucan choked, eyes widening, before a backhand sent him flying. Thula shot forward, weaving around Lucan's flying body with grace. Her fists became a blur as she threw a barrage of precise, rapid punches aimed at his face, throat, and ribs. Thula was fast. She struck hard, her hit sending sharp jolts of pain through Nolan's muscles. He blocked most of them with his forearms, but a few managed to land, one in particular striking his rib cage with enough force to crack the bone. Nolan grunted, feeling the pain flare, but he didn't slow down. Thula made her mistake when she pulled back for a big strike, her body winding up for a devastating hook to his temple. Too slow. Nolan caught her wrist mid-strike, twisting it sharply. Thula's eyes widened in pain, but before she could react, he yanked her toward him. Their foreheads collided in a brutal headbutt, sending her flying towards Neptune's moon. Nolan chased after her. Nolan's fight. Lucan was fast, aggressive, and brash, relying on brute strength and overwhelming force. He favored wild haymakers, wide swings meant to crush bones and pulp flesh. But he wasn't as disciplined as he thought he was. He fought like a berserker, predictable in his recklessness. Thula, on the other hand, was precise. Calculated. She didn't rush in. She observed, striking when it was most effective, using her blade-like braid as a weapon. She could slip through openings in a fight, capitalizing on even the slightest moment of distraction. She was far more dangerous than Lucan in that regard. Thula looked up from the crater she landed in, blood streaming from her nose as she straightened herself. She snarled, looking at the incoming Nolan. And as he closed in on her, she whipped her braid toward Nolan's neck. The blade at the tip of her hair gleamed, aiming to slit his throat. Nolan's hand snapped up, catching the braid mid-swing. He pulled. Hard. Thula yelled as she was yanked forward uncontrollably. Nolan twisted, his knee rising to meet her midsection in a devastating strike. She gasped as the wind was knocked out of her, her body curling inward from the impact. Before she could recover, Nolan kicked her away, sending her flying into the rocky terrain. One down. Lucan had recovered by now, his jaw clenched in rage. He roared, shooting back toward Nolan with reckless fury. Nolan narrowed his eyes. He's predictable. Lucan's approach was telegraphed, his fists cocked back, ready to swing. Nolan didn't even bother dodging this time. Instead, he let Lucan close the distance. Then, at the last possible second, Nolan ducked. Lucan's fist whiffed over his head. Nolan immediately countered with an uppercut to Lucan's ribs, his knuckles driving into the soft tissue between the bones. He felt the ribs break beneath his fist, the crunch vibrating through his knuckles. Lucan howled in pain, spitting out blood. Nolan followed up with a rapid sequence of strikes, an elbow to the sternum, a quick knee to the solar plexus, and then a brutal hammer fist down onto Lucan's collarbone. Crack! Lucan's body seized, pain paralyzing him for a split second. But that was all Nolan needed. With a roar, he drove his fist into Lucan's jaw, sending the Mun careening backward at blinding speeds. The impact sent him tumbling through space, his body completely limp. 2 down. A sudden feeling sprouts up from behind Nolan. Shit. Thula had recovered, her body spinning as she used her braid like a whip, the knife at the end aiming straight for his skull. Nolan tilted his head at the last second. The blade grazed his cheek, drawing blood, but it missed its mark. That was her mistake. Nolan grabbed her by the braid again and yanked her downward, hard. She screamed as her body was slammed into the ground below. The impact sent up a cloud of debris, and before she could recover, Nolan descended upon her, both feet crashing down onto her back. There was a sickening snap. Thula's spine broke. Her scream was muffled in the moon's surface, luckily preventing her from opening her mouth to lose all her air, her body twitching violently before going limp. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't getting up anytime soon. Nolan would huff if he wasn't in space, rolling his shoulders. He had held back enough to ensure they weren't dead. A few seconds later, Lucan's body floated nearby, completely unconscious. Nolan grabbed him by the arm, dragging him toward Mark, who just finished up his battle. Mark's fight. General Craig scrutinized Mark. Maybe with the loss of his child, Nolan will see how foolish he is being and return to his duties. With a speed that would have overwhelmed any lesser fighter, the Viltrumite general charged, a blur of white armor and raw power. His fist shot forward like a missile, the sheer force behind it capable of leveling city blocks. Mark reacted instantly, shifting slightly to the side. Craig's fist passed harmlessly by his cheek, and before he could retract, Mark delivered a devastating punch to his gut. The force sent Craig rocketing into the distance, spitting out large amounts of blood, disappearing into the void. Unlike Craig, who had relied on overwhelming force, Anissa moved strategically. She feinted left before shifting mid-flight, aiming a precise strike at Mark's face. The blow connected, her knuckles slamming against his cheekbone with enough force to break mountains. Mark didn't even budge, letting her hit him. I felt that, not that it hurt or anything. Anissa's eyes flickered with something, shock, frustration, or intrigue. What the? Mark smirked. That it? Anissa snarled and attacked again. This time, she aimed a rapid succession of strikes, elbows, knees, hooks, and kicks. Each blow was meant to break bones, to crush organs. He ducked under one of her swings, planting his fist into her stomach with a brutal punch. Anissa's breath left her in an instant as her body folded around his fist. She was launched backward, her body flipping uncontrollably through space. But before she could recover, Mark was already on her. Using his superior speed, he appeared above her, grabbed her by the ankle, and swung her like a rag doll, hurling her into a passing meteorite. The rock exploded on impact. Anissa coughed up blood, her body twitching from the force of the attack. She gasped for air but found none. Before she could lose consciousness and suffocate in space, Mark waved his hand. A barrier of air surrounded her. She had fought hundreds of battles across the cosmos. She had conquered worlds, broken warriors, and slaughtered civilizations. Yet now, she was helpless. Anissa coughed violently, taking in the air, staring at the barrier with disbelief. What? I possess some magical capabilities. Making a pocket of air was nothing, Mark answered simply. She stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't something a Viltrumite should be capable of. Mark crossed his arms. But, it is possible, and I would be happy to teach you and the rest of the Viltrumites under my rule. I don't want to kill you guys, seeing as the Viltrumite population is already low enough. I just want to fix this empire and make it better. She got back into her stance, wiping the blood from her mouth. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes burned with a hint of lust. You're stronger than I expected. Mark looked at her expression and guffawed. Is she? Hey, quick question, are you a masochist? Mark asked. What are you talking about? Anissa stuttered out with blushing cheeks. Mark was stunned. It looked like she had those tendencies in comics, but he didn't expect it in real life. If he was being honest, while he didn't like what Anissa did to Mark, he couldn't deny he was attracted to her. Anissa, like most Viltrumites, had a physique sculpted for war. Her body was the epitome of power and elegance combined, statuesque, toned, and radiating an almost primal allure. Her muscles, though defined, did not detract from her femininity. They only enhanced it, giving her a sense of raw, commanding presence that could rival even the most battle-hardened warriors. Her face was sharp, yet undeniably feminine, high cheekbones, a perfectly sculpted jawline, and full lips that could shift between a smirk of amusement and a sneer of dominance in an instant. Her piercing blue eyes burned with a fierce intensity, holding both pride and intrigue, their depths reflecting the hardened will of a warrior who had conquered entire worlds. Her body was built like a goddess of war, every curve accentuated by lean, powerful muscle. Her broad shoulders tapered down into a trim, sculpted waist, emphasizing her busted chest and hourglass figure in a way that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Her arms and legs were honed through centuries of combat. As Mark looked at her, Anissa noticed his gaze towards her chest and smirked a little. Mark looked up, directing his gaze towards her face. He found himself attracted to her a little, but he already had girl problems back on Earth that he would have to deal with soon. Amber was fun, caring, and definitely a person he could see himself with. He had told her the truth about his identity early on in their relationship, so unlike in the comics, she was more receptive to his superhero identity. But they weren't in a relationship like Mark was in canon, since at the time he was scared about her lifespan and seeing her grow old and die while he stayed young for as long as there were stars and probably beyond that. Instead, they became friends with benefits, so she didn't have to deal with the baggage of his alien/superhero lifestyle fully. Eve was always supportive of both his superhero and personal identity. They were a great duo, whether it be fighting crime or just hanging out together. She was always a caring type of person, but despite her intelligence, power, and confidence, Eve has moments of insecurity, especially regarding her self-worth. She was also potentially one of the only people that could be with him for eternity, and she lights a warmth in his chest whenever she smiles at him. Amanda was someone who faced many hardships due to her condition, but she came out of it stronger. She was often frustrated or lonely back in her child form. But now that she had returned back to her adult form, she exuded a quiet, mature confidence. She was sarcastic, witty, and a loving person, and since Mark was the one to turn her back, she had been pouring tons of her love onto him. He had been accepting her feelings because he knew it must have been hard for her with her fear of her future, something he could previously relate to, and didn't want her to feel rejected now that she was putting herself back out there. But, as they spent time together once in a while, he found himself enjoying her directness and the way they spent time experiencing activities she couldn't in her child form. He still had to find a permanent solution to her condition, but he was making progress when he had the downtime. After thinking about the girls in his life, he put them aside for now to focus on the battle he was currently in, seeing General Craig returning. Craig, who had recovered, floated up to Mark, still clutching his chest from Mark's earlier attack. That single blow and the multiple damaged organs were enough for him to realize that Mark was way out of his league. His face twisted in rage. "You are delusional if you think you can take over." Mark sighed. "You're gonna go back to Viltrum and tell Grand Regent Thrag I'm coming. And I'm taking the Empire." Craig glared. "The Grand Regent will crush you." Mark smirked. "We'll see." Nolan floated up beside him, his own opponents beaten unconscious. Craig stared at them for a long moment before he and Anissa grabbed Thula and Lucan's bodies and flew back to their ship. This isn't over. As the Viltrumites retreated, Mark's wristwatch suddenly lit up. The emergency beacon. His friends. D.A. Sinclair. Mark turned to his father with a sheepish smile. I need to get back to Earth now, so I apologize in advance, but we need to get there the quick way. Nolan barely had time to process his words before Mark grabbed his shoulder and snapped his fingers. A portal opened up in front of them, and Mark pushed Nolan through before following. And suddenly, they were now in their living room. Nolan staggered at the change in location and then immediately kneeled and threw up. Debbie ran over from the kitchen. Nolan. What happened? Mark was already moving. I teleported him. He wasn't ready. He shot out the door. His friends needed him. The bright sun shone down on Upstate University as students strolled along the pathways. Among them were William, Amber, and Eve, following behind their enthusiastic guide, Rick Sheridan, as he gestured toward the various buildings and facilities the university had to offer. And over here is our main student center, Rick said with a grin. It's got a dining hall, study spaces, and a 24-hour coffee shop. Trust me, you'll need it for those all-nighters. William leaned toward Amber with an amused smirk. $20 says half the students here survive solely on caffeine and stress. Amber chuckled. Oh, for sure. I bet their bloodstream is at least 30% espresso. Rick, overhearing them, laughed. Not gonna lie, you're not wrong. Finals week here is basically a zombie apocalypse. As they continued their tour, Eve listened but wasn't fully paying attention. Her mind was occupied with other thoughts, specifically, about Mark. She hated that he wasn't able to come with them, but she understood that his responsibilities as a hero sometimes took priority. He had left with his father to fight off aliens in deep space, and she had trust that he would come back in one piece. But she was still worried. She sighed, shaking off her thoughts. There's no point in dwelling on it now. She was here, and she might as well enjoy herself. They had just entered the plaza when a deep, inhuman roar suddenly tore through the air. Screams followed almost immediately. The students around them froze in confusion before panic set in, sending people scrambling for safety. What the hell was that? William shouted. Then they saw it. A hulking, grotesque figure burst into the plaza, its body covered in mechanical enhancements, its skin stretched and distorted around the metal. It moved unnaturally, its steps heavy and erratic as if it were being controlled against its will. Everyone, get out of here, now. Rick shouted, trying to direct students away from the scene. Eve's eyes widened. She had no idea what the hell this thing was, but she knew one thing: it needed to be stopped. Taking a quick glance at her friends, Eve dashed off into some bushes to change into her costume. The creature let out a mechanical groan, its movements jerky yet impossibly strong. People screamed, scattering in all directions. Adam Eve reappeared in the sky, her pink energy signature flashing as she flew into action. She immediately spotted the monster rampaging through the plaza, with students running in every direction to avoid its path. Eve's eyes widened. She had no idea what the hell this thing was, but she knew one thing: it needed to be stopped. A scream caught her attention. She turned just in time to see a massive chunk of concrete from a broken building hurtling toward her friends and some other students. Shit. Eve darted forward, forming a pink energy construct in the shape of a large bat. She swung it with precision, smashing the debris midair and shattering it before it could reach William and the others. William, having shielded himself instinctively, slowly lowered his arms and gawked. Eve. Amber, standing beside him, looked equally shocked. Oh my God, you're Adam Eve. Eve realized that her cover was blown. She hadn't exactly planned to reveal her identity to them yet, but there wasn't time to worry about that. Less staring, more running, she called out before turning her focus back to the Renamon. The creature, still rampaging, grabbed a nearby food truck and, with horrifying strength, flung it toward a campus building. The truck crashed through the front wall, sending cracked spiderwebbing through the structure. The whole building groaned as it began to collapse. Eve acted fast. She extended her hands, her energy surging as she formed a massive construct to reinforce the structure, preventing it from caving in entirely. At the same time, she wrapped protective energy shields around the students still in the way of debris, carefully moving them out of danger. Holding up a collapsing building while protecting civilians was already stretching her limits, and the monster wasn't stopping its assault. Amber, realizing how bad the situation was getting, bit her lip before making a decision. She reached into her pocket and pressed the emergency watch Mark had given her. She didn't know if he was close enough to get here in time. But she hoped. As she glanced up, she noticed something chilling. The monster was staring at her. It let out a guttural growl before charging. Amber's heart pounded as she instinctively took a step back. It was coming for her. Rick, who had been standing beside her the entire time, grabbed her wrist and began dragging her away. Amber, move. But before the monster could reach them, something stopped it. A hand. A single hand grasped its face. The next second, the creature was sent flying across the plaza with a single devastating punch. The dust settled, revealing Invincible floating above them, his hair billowing in the wind. He had arrived. Amber let out a breath, her eyes widening in relief. Mark immediately shushed her, putting a finger to his lips. Secret identity, remember? He whispered. Amber gasped, clamping her hands over her mouth. Oh, right. Sorry. Eve, who had just finished stabilizing the building, floated down near him, her expression both relieved and exasperated. You didn't need to come. I had it handled. Amber sheepishly rubbed the back of her neck. Sorry, I called him. Before Mark could reply, the monster got back up, letting out a distorted snarl. Mark narrowed his eyes. He recognized that despite its monstrous appearance, the Renamon was still a human being inside that body. He needed to be careful. Time to chill out, he muttered. With a deep breath, he released a powerful gust of cold air from his mouth. The freezing breath swept over the Renamon, encasing it in solid ice within seconds. Mark lowered his hands, observing his work. That should hold it. But he was wrong. The Renamon, despite being frozen, flexed its grotesque muscles and shattered the ice with sheer strength, its rage undeterred. The Renamon lunged at Mark once again. He dodged, parrying its attacks with swift movements, his hands deflecting each blow effortlessly. Eve took the opportunity to create another energy construct, a massive pink bat, and swung it with all her strength. The impact struck the Renamon in the head, knocking loose a device embedded in the back of its skull. Immediately, the creature stopped moving. Its body sagged before collapsing entirely. Eve blinked. Did I just? Mark looked down at the broken device on the ground. You didn't kill it. It was just being controlled, but not anymore. Eve's stomach turned. She had suspected as much, but seeing the evidence made it even worse. Mark exhaled sharply, seeing this in real life. This is sick. His eyes flashed with a little anger as he turned his gaze toward the hole the Renamon had emerged from. Eve saw where he was looking. Mark, come on. Let's go down there, he said before floating down into the hole. Eve sighed, looking at the dirty sewer but followed. This is not going to be fun. Mark and Eve continued traveling through the sewers when the sound of rapid footsteps could be heard. Then, they attacked. The first Renamon lunged from the shadows, its enhanced limbs carrying it forward at terrifying speed. Before it could reach them, 3 more emerged from side tunnels, their cybernetic bodies moving with a horrifying mix of human-like fluidity and mechanical precision. Eve barely had time to react before the first one slammed into Mark, its massive metal fist swinging toward his face. The impact was thunderous. But Mark didn't move. The Reanimon's fist remained pressed against his cheek for a second, then slowly dropped as if it realized something was wrong. Mark tilted his head slightly, his expression completely neutral. That's it. The creature roared, bringing both hands down in a hammer fist. Another one wrapped its metal arms around him from behind, locking him in an inhumanly strong grip while the others started pounding on his torso. The sound of metal on flesh reverberated through the tunnel. Eve gasped. Mark. For a split second, she thought maybe they were actually hurting him. Maybe, then, she saw his face. He looked bored. With a blur of motion too fast to follow, Mark moved. The one behind him was thrown over his head, slamming hard into the ground below before removing the device from the back of its head. Mark shot forward, weaving between the remaining 3, his fingers reaching the base of their skulls with surgical precision. He pulled the devices from their heads. One by one, they collapsed, their bodies going limp like puppets with their strings cut. It took less than 5 seconds. Eve hovered a few feet away, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. Mark exhaled, his hands clenched into fists as he stared at the motionless bodies. Pathetic. His voice was cold. Too cold. Eve had seen Mark fight plenty of times before. She had seen him serious. But this was different. There was something wrong about it. The way he moved. The efficiency. The sheer ease with which he dismantled them. There was no hesitation. No restraint. For the first time, she felt a hint of fear, not of him, but for him. Mark. She started but stopped when she saw his eyes. They were burning with anger. Mark took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a lingering thought. He turned to Eve. Let's move. Eve hesitated but nodded, using her powers to gently lift the unconscious Rhiannon. They continued forward, deeper into the nightmare ahead. The underground lair was a nightmare. Eve covered her mouth, trying not to gag at the sight. Bodies, some still twitching, lay scattered across the lab. Limbs, half mechanized, hung from operating tables. The stench of burnt flesh and chemicals filled the air. Then, they saw him. D.A. Sinclair. The Mun himself was in a frenzy, scrambling to gather his notes as he attempted to flee. Mark landed in front of him in a blink. Before Sinclair could react, Mark grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Mark's eyes glowed red with barely contained rage. How could you? Mark's voice was low and venomous. Sinclair wheezed, clawing at Mark's grip. You don't understand. I was making them better. Mark's grip tightened. Better. You turned dismembered people and turned them into mindless slaves. Sinclair grinned, even as he struggled to breathe. You're blind. My work will make humanity superior, even stronger than you. Mark's fists trembled. For a moment, Eve genuinely thought he was about to kill him. She quickly placed a hand on Mark's arm. Mark. Stop. Mark didn't move. Mark, Eve said softly. You're better than this. Mark's breath was heavy. He glared at Sinclair, who continued to smirk. Then, finally, Mark exhaled. He realized he got a little too worked up. While his crimes were severe, he didn't deserve death since he didn't kill them. Mark thought he didn't deserve any of the comforts outside of a jail cell. He knew the GDA would want to use him, but it didn't factor into his decision whether or not to let Sinclair live, but his relationship with Eve would change irreparably if he did so. And with that, he tossed Sinclair to the ground, his eyes still burning with anger. If I ever find out you're still doing this to living people, Mark said darkly, I'll throw you into space. Sinclair coughed but didn't speak. Mark activated his comms. Cecil. Come pick this piece of trash up. As the battle settled, the chaos on campus slowly dissipated. Students who had taken cover behind benches and buildings were cautiously stepping out, whispering among themselves. In the aftermath, the GDA had arrived in full force, teleporting in with their Black Ops agents, securing the area. They moved efficiently, restraining the downed Rhiannon and setting up containment fields around the wreckage. At the center of it all was D.A. Sinclair, who was thrashing in the grip of 2 GDA agents, his face twisted in rage. Let me go. You imbeciles don't understand. I was elevating the human race. Sinclair shouted, struggling against his restraints. One of the agents shoved him forward roughly. Yeah? Tell that to the people you mutilated. Sinclair sneered. Those people are now evolutionarily superior to the rest of you weaklings. Do you know what I've created? A future where we can challenge the likes of Invincible. Where we are not at the mercy of gods. Yeah, keep talking, another agent muttered as they pushed him toward a swirling blue portal. We'll see how much your theories hold up in a cell. Before disappearing through the portal, Sinclair turned his wild eyes toward Mark and Eve. His lip curled into a snarl. You think you've won? You're fools. You of all people should understand, Invincible. You fight with such power, such brutality. And yet, you let weakness hold you back. His words were cut off as the portal snapped shut behind him, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. Eve let out a breath. God, what a lunatic. Mark's expression remained tight as he watched the last traces of the portal fade. He knew Cecil wasn't going to just let Sinclair rot in a cell. He'd make use of his work, just like he did in the comics. Mark wasn't sure how to feel about that. Cecil walked over, hands still tucked in his coat pockets. Hell of a job, you two. We're going to make sure that D.A. Sinclair is locked up nice and tight. And we'll help his so-called Reaniman go back to normal. Mark just crossed his arms. Right. And you're sure you're going to lock him away and never use his tech, right? Cecil frowned slightly. Of course. We'll do what needs to be done. Mark's eyes narrowed. He took a step forward. I can hear your heart rate spiking when you lie, Cecil. For a brief moment, the older man's expression faltered. It was only for a second, but Mark caught it. Cecil sighed, rubbing his temple. Look, kid. I'm not going to bullshit you. His work is horrific, but that doesn't mean it isn't useful. If we can repurpose his tech for good, we'd be idiots not to. Mark just took a slow breath and stepped back. Cecil watched him carefully. Smart choice. You're good at thinking long-term. Mark gave him a sharp look. Don't patronize me. Cecil smirked, nodding. Duly noted. With that, the GDA finished securing the area, and Cecil teleported away. Mark let out a sigh and turned to Eve, who was watching him with a soft expression. Thanks for stopping me from doing something stupid. Eve smiled. You weren't going to kill him, Mark. Mark raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? She tilted her head, considering. Maybe. But you hesitated. That means something. Mark then nodded. Yeah, I wasn't going to kill him. But what he did was inhumane and something I'll always be able to see vividly with my powers. They shared a brief, understanding look before Mark turned his attention back to the scene. All right. We should get back to Amber and Will. Eve agreed, and together, they flew back up to the surface to change into their civilian identities. By the time Mark and Eve rejoined the others, things on campus had mostly calmed. The students were still in shock, but the GDA's containment efforts had kept the major damage controlled. Mark and Eve were walking up to the others when Amber suddenly threw her arms around him. You're okay, she said, holding on to him tightly. Mark chuckled, returning the hug. I always am. Eve, standing nearby, crossed her arms. I did have it handled, you know. You didn't need to call him. Amber pulled back slightly, looking a little sheepish. Yeah, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. They resumed the tour with Mark officially joining them, though whispers of Sinclair's arrest and the Reaniman attack lingered around them. As the sun began to set, the group ended up in the dorms, chatting and unwinding before heading to a party. Eventually, as the two sat in Rick's dorm, William turned to Mark with a knowing grin. All right, dude. Spill. Mark raised an eyebrow. Spill what? William scoffed. Come on. You, Amber, and Eve. What's going on there? Mark blinked. What? Oh, come on. You know what, replied William. Mark groaned. Jesus Christ. William smirked. It's obvious. Both of them like you, and you haven't made a decision. Mark hesitated. It's complicated. William leaned forward. How complicated? Mark sighed. I like them both. I turned Amber down at first because of, well, lifespan stuff, so we ended up being friends with benefits. But I might have a way to fix that, so I can't use that as an excuse anymore. And Eve, she's different. She just got out of a relationship. She's figuring herself out. I don't want to mess that up, but I noticed the signs she was putting out. Aside from both of them, I also have Amanda to think about. William's jaw dropped. Another one? Mark groaned, rubbing his face. Dude, stop making it sound so bad. William stared at him like he was witnessing the greatest drama in the universe. You're in so deep, man. Mark sighed. I know. And I need to figure out what to do. William grinned. Well, whoever you pick, you should be upfront with the others. Don't be an asshole about it. Mark groaned. Yeah, I know. William smirked. At least I don't have to worry about this mess. Mark's eyes narrowed mischievously. Oh yeah? You and Rick have been spending a lot of time together. William's face turned bright red. Shut the hell up. Mark grinned. Hey, my superpowers include gaydar. William looked at him, suspicious. You're joking, right? Mark burst into laughter. William groaned. I hate you. The conversation devolved into laughter, the day's stress momentarily forgotten. Mark soared through the sky, his mind drifting between the present and the enormous future that awaited him. The cool wind rushing past his face did little to distract him from the thoughts that had been brewing in his mind for days now. He had made countless changes to this timeline, some small, some monumental, but one, in particular, stood out. His father was still here. Omniman hadn't left Earth for Thraxa. That singular change meant Oliver would never be born. There would be no Thraxan-Viltrumite hybrids, no eventual war brought on by Thrag's desperation to maintain Viltrumite dominance through forced breeding. That entire branch of events had been severed. Mark wasn't sure how he felt about it yet. Oliver had been his brother in another timeline, but here? He didn't exist. He wouldn't exist. And that was just the start. As much as he wanted to reflect on the massive butterfly effects he had already set into motion, he had more pressing matters. His company. His future as Emperor of the Viltrumites. And, of course, his plan to explore other universes. That last thought sparked a small grin across his face. The potential experiences were exhilarating to think about. There were so many places he wanted to visit, so many people he wanted to meet. He imagined standing across from Superman, sizing him up, or racing against the Flash just for fun. Meeting Wonder Woman and seeing just how hot she was. He had no real desire to meet Batman, though. The guy was too paranoid, too obsessed with knowing everything. Nightwing, on the other hand? He seemed cool. It wasn't just DC he had his sights set on. Marvel, Dragon Ball, even High School DxD. The last one made him chuckle perversely. That particular world had piqued his interest for, well, multiple reasons. Mostly the magic. Probably. But all of that was in the future. For now, he needed to focus on stabilizing his company and getting it off the ground. Within moments, he reached his destination. His headquarters. The sleek, modern skyscraper that once belonged to Machine Head was now his. He had repurposed the building, turning it into the heart of his operations. It wasn't just a business, this was a foundation for the future Viltrumite headquarters on Earth. The elevator dinged as Mark stepped inside, pressing a floor number. The button flickered from red to green with a soft buzz before the lift began its smooth ascent. His company needed a name. He had been pondering Invincible Incorporated, but was that too on the nose? It had a nice ring to it, though. When the door slid open, he was greeted by a familiar sight, Eve. She had been the one to buzz him in, a bright smile on her face as she stood by the entrance to her new private floor. The moment she saw him, she wasted no time jumping into his arms, wrapping him in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered into his shoulder. "Seriously. I needed to get out of that house." Mark chuckled, holding her close before pulling back slightly. "You would have left eventually." "Yeah, but now I don't have to worry about where I'd go." Eve had taken him up on his offer to work with him, which meant moving out of her parents' house. She now had an entire private floor to herself, complete with a massive living room, multiple guest rooms, an indoor pool, a personal theater, a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, and even room for expansion. With her abilities, she could customize the space however she wanted. Mark let her down. "All right," Mark said. "Let's go over what you'll actually be doing here." They made their way through the building. There was a lot to discuss, and he wanted to give her the full rundown of what she could choose to work in. First, he took her to the laboratory. "This is where I do most of the production," he explained, leading her into the expansive, high-tech space filled with machinery that was producing vats of his fluid fabric. Eve's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the black liquid being produced. "So this is what makes your suit?" Mark nodded. "Yeah. Production is still in the early stages, though. Right now, I'm barely keeping things afloat financially. The only reason I haven't gone under is because of Machine Head's old accounts. But that money won't last forever." Eve looked around, her mind already spinning with ideas. "You need more labor, don't you?" Mark smirked. Yeah, but I also don't want to deal with spies stealing samples of the raw stuff or corporate sabotage. So I have a plan for that. He guided her into another section of the lab where machines were printing out standard clothing designs, police uniforms, doctor and nurse outfits, and even standard gear for the GDA. I talked to Cecil, Mark continued. He spread the word about my company, and I already have pre-orders coming in from law enforcement, hospitals, and the GDA itself. For now, we're only handling standard designs. Custom orders are going to take more time. Eve turned to him with a questioning look. And you want me to help with that? If you want, Mark shrugged. I can show you how to create and manipulate the fluid fabric with your powers. You'd be able to create custom orders much faster than I could with just machines. Eve hesitated, her fingers tracing the smooth material of a nearby uniform. You really trust me with that? Mark met her gaze without hesitation. Of course. A faint blush crept up Eve's cheeks, but she didn't comment on it. Mark then led her to another floor, an empty space for now, but one that would soon become something much greater. He had remembered the business Mark and Eve had in the show and took inspiration from that for his own company. This is going to be a private security division, he explained. I'm thinking about making it a heroes for hire type of deal. There are always people or businesses that need protection from monster attacks and villains. This could provide them with that while also giving heroes a stable source of income. Eve's brow furrowed in thought. Like a security agency? Exactly, Mark confirmed. And if I can get a few fellow Viltrumites to work with me in the future, this could become something massive. But I'll need someone I trust to oversee it. She nodded, already seeing the potential in the idea. During their tour of Upstate University, Mark had already explained his business with the Viltrumite Empire and his current plans for it. The conversation had come up naturally when William, Amber, and Eve started asking him about what exactly he was doing in space. Flashbacks start. Mark had expected curiosity, but he hadn't expected just how many questions they'd have. So, let me get this straight, William had started, crossing his arms while leaning against a tree in the campus courtyard. You're planning to take over an intergalactic empire by beating the strongest guy they have? Pretty much, Mark confirmed, hands in his jacket pockets. Once I win, the rest of them will have to follow my orders. Amber raised a skeptical eyebrow. And you're sure you can beat him? Mark just smirked. You doubt me? I mean, yes, Amber deadpanned. You're strong, Mark. Like, insanely strong. But this guy has been ruling an entire species of superpowered conquerors for centuries. You really think you can just punch him and take the throne? Mark shrugged. I know I can. I beat my dad pretty easily and he's one of the stronger Viltrumites and I'm just continuing to grow stronger by the second. Eve tilted her head slightly. Okay, but assuming you win, what happens next? You're just king of the Viltrumites now? What does that even mean? Will you leave Earth and stay in space? Do you even know how to run an empire? Well, he started, for the most part, I'll probably have advisors helping me learn how to rule, but it'll be a trial process, as I'll learn as I go. And no, I won't leave Earth. A virus wiped out most of the Viltrumite population centuries ago. There are probably less than 50 of them left in the entire universe. Amber's expression softened slightly. That's not a lot. Exactly, Mark nodded. Which means we'll need to focus our time on repopulating the species. Since humans and Viltrumites are incredibly compatible. A union between the two produces a hybrid where Viltrumite DNA dominantly takes over the human DNA, producing an essentially 99.9% pureblood Viltrumite. That means Earth is the best place for the Viltrumites to repopulate, with some probably needing to take multiple partners to bring numbers up. At those words, Eve's and Amber's expressions shifted. They didn't say anything at first, but Mark could tell they were both thinking the same thing. Amber pursed her lips, her brows furrowing slightly. She wasn't opposed to the idea outright, but it was clear she was thinking about what that meant for her and Mark. Would she be willing to share if it came to that? Could she? Eve, on the other hand, was harder to read. She had a more neutral expression, but her arms were crossed, and she was deep in thought. She wasn't against it either, but she was probably weighing her options. Mark, of course, noticed everything. He wasn't stupid. He had put the idea out there on purpose, just to see how they would react. And their lack of immediate rejection told him everything he needed to know. It made him feel like a scumbag, in a way. He had strong feelings for both of them. Maybe even more than just them if he included Amanda. If he chose only one, then he would lose the others. But if this was a possibility, if they were open to it, then maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to. Still, this wasn't something he could force. If it didn't work out, he'd have to accept it and move on. He couldn't string them along forever. But for now, it seemed like the idea wasn't completely off the table. Flashback end. Mark took Eve to another floor, this one just as empty as the last. This, he said, is where we're going to focus on producing resources for the human population. You mentioned how your powers could be used for more than just fighting crime, and that got me thinking. If we use cloning technology and your abilities, we could increase food production, improve medicine, and create resources that could genuinely better the world. Eve's face lit up. You actually want to do that? Mark grinned. Of course. You inspired the idea. Eve's enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time, she saw how she could contribute in a meaningful way outside of hero work. Finally, Mark brought her to the elevator and, after pressing a few floor numbers into a number sequence, pulled open the panel with the elevator number buttons, revealing a scanner behind it. Placing his hand on the scanner, the elevator continued down past the ground floor, revealing an underground lair beneath his headquarters. As they stepped out of the elevator, Eve's eyes widened in shock. The massive chamber was reminiscent of Iron Man's armory, walls lined with display cases filled with mannequins, advanced machinery, and, against the far wall, a massive computer akin to Batman's Batcomputer. To their left, several mannequins stood in display cases, each bare except for 3 of them. 2 of the mannequins were clad in the 2 different versions of Mark's suits that he wore. His old nanotech suit, so-called MK1, and a suit that looked like his new one made from fluid fabric, so-called MK2. One of the displays caught Eve's eye immediately, her suit. What is all this? And why is my suit here? She asked. Mark smirked. Because this is where we'll be operating as a crime-fighting duo. I designed this floor as our crime-fighting Overwatch room. The computer AI called Community, aka Unity, will monitor the city for us, so we don't have to waste time flying around looking for trouble and don't have to rely on Cecil all the time. Eve turned to him, still processing everything. And my suit? Well, it's mainly to pay homage to the original suit and for design choices for our lair, Mark said. Mark then pressed a button on his wrist, and a claw-like machine lowered another case from the ceiling. Inside was a brand new suit. It looked almost identical to her original, but it was enhanced, made with fluid fabric, packed with advanced features. I didn't change the design since I wanted your input, Mark said. But it's made from my fluid fabric and has some neat mentally commanded pre-built functions in case you were in a situation where you can't access your powers or use them fast enough or want to conserve energy. It can morph into different modes automatically with 2 words, armor mode for defense, which instantly creates a suit of armor around her, preserving her body better than most of her constructs can, space mode, which focuses on survivability in space or water and creates a sealed suit providing her with breathable air from surrounding molecules regardless of where she is, stealth mode for invisibility, and offensive mode for built-in weapons. Eve stared at the suit in awe. You did all this? Mark shrugged. Figured you deserved something as good as my own. She ran her fingers over the material, feeling how different it was from her usual constructs. It was alive, in a way. Mark continued, if you ever need to store it, you can just morph it into a bracelet. And if you want, I can show you how to make regular fluid fabric outfits yourself. Eve considered everything before finally making her decision. I want to run the resource division, she said. If this can help the world, I want to be the one to make sure it happens. Mark grinned. Good. You're the president of that division, then. Are you sure about president? I don't even know how to run a business, Eve questioned. Mark replies, look at me, I didn't understand business well at first, but I put in a lot of studying to get better and you always have me if you need help. Before Eve could respond, alarms blared through the room. The Overwatch screen lit up, showing a massive insect-like kaiju attacking a beach, heading toward the city. No heroes were nearby. Mark turned to Eve, his suit already morphing around him. Ready to test that suit? Eve smirked, her own suit forming around her. Let's do it. They shot out of the hidden exit, soaring into the sky. The roar of the Kaiju split through the air like an ear-piercing shockwave, rattling windows and sending civilians screaming in every direction. The massive insect-like monster, standing as tall as a skyscraper, flapped its 6 beetle-like wings, creating powerful gusts of wind that knocked over vehicles and shattered nearby structures. A single breath of its acidic exhalation melted an entire block of buildings, leaving nothing but sizzling debris and pools of bubbling liquid. As Mark and Eve approached, flying above the city, Mark's supervision took in the devastation with efficiency. The acid isn't just melting things, it's spreading like wildfire. If I don't get these people out of here, they'll be dissolved before they can run. Mark thought. Eve, on the other hand, examined the beast itself, analyzing its anatomy. The wings give it mobility. The exoskeleton looks pretty durable. That stinger? It's going to be a problem, she thought. Her hands curled into fists as her fluid fabric suit tightened around her form, preparing for battle. We're doing this fast and efficiently, Mark said, eyes darting across the city. I'll handle the civilians, you take care of the bug. Eve grinned, flexing her fingers as her suit's molecular weave shifted. Perfect. Let's test this thing out. With a thought, she activated her suit's combat mode. Offense mode, she commanded. Her suit morphed seamlessly, her sleeves extended into energy blasters, while a jetpack and leg boosters activated, boosting her mobility. Her shorts extended into armored pants, increasing protection. Mark nodded, already shooting off at hypersonic speed, appearing everywhere at once as he rescued civilians in the blink of an eye. Buildings collapsed where people once stood, only to be caught in Mark's arms and moved to safety before they even realized what was happening. Meanwhile, Eve shot forward, firing her blasters at pinpoint accuracy, sending concentrated beams of energy through the Kaiju's wings. ZSH. The blasts cut through the monster's flesh like butter, leaving behind massive cauterized holes in its exoskeleton. The Kaiju screeched in agony, its wings flapping wildly to keep itself airborne despite the damage. Eve's eyes widened slightly. Holy crap. These blasts are even stronger than I thought. Eve exclaimed in her mind. However, the Kaiju wasn't done. It let out another deafening roar before turning its gaze toward Eve. She reacted just in time as its tail curled forward, launching massive, spear-sized stingers directly at her. Wanting to try out the other modes in her suit, Eve mentally called out, defense mode. Her suit morphed instantly, the jetpack and boosters remained, but her armor thickened, a helmet formed over her head, and her arms reshaped into 2 halves of a massive shield. She crossed them together, creating a square-like metal shield, and then an additional hard light dome formed around her as a second layer of protection. The stingers hit the shield and instantly dissolved upon contact. Eve's eyes widened as she took in the efficiency of the system. Mark, what kind of genius are you? These are better than my own shields. Down below, Mark finished evacuating the last of the civilians and turned to see Eve's barrier holding strong. He smirked. Looks like the Kryptonian defense barriers worked just as well as I hoped. Only downside, too much solar energy consumption. But it didn't matter. Eve wouldn't need to hold it for long. With a thought, she switched back to offense mode, her right arm reshaping into a sonic cannon. Take this. She fired, and a blast of sonic waves struck the Kaiju, stunning it in place. Eve didn't hesitate, her arms shifted into massive plasma swords, and she sliced through the Kaiju's wings, cutting them off in one swift motion. The beast fell, crashing through buildings below, but its defiance burned hotter than ever. With a sudden movement, it curled into a ball, using its hard exoskeleton as a defensive shell, and rolled toward the city. Mark saw it immediately. Nope. With a boom, he blasted forward, landing directly in front of the Kaiju's rolling form, catching it mid-roll. The sheer force would have sent any other hero aside from him and his father flying, but he didn't budge. Instead, Mark lifted the Kaiju into the air like it weighed nothing, his muscles barely even flexing from the effort before throwing it high into the air. Eve. Finish it. Eve morphed her entire suit into a massive energy cannon, glowing with blinding solar energy as she unleashed a concentrated blast. Boom. The Kaiju was vaporized, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dissipating energy. Eve stared at her hands in shock. Damn. That was ridiculous. She flew down toward Mark, her suit returning to its normal state. Mark, this suit is insane, she exclaimed, excitement shining in her eyes. It's so fast. So powerful. And it lets me switch combat styles instantly. Mark smirked, arms crossed. I'm glad it works so well. Before they could continue, a voice called out. Wow, way to make a group of heroes feel inadequate. Turning, they saw the Guardians of the Globe approaching. Robot, Monster Girl, Duplicate, Black Samson, and Rexplode stood in formation. Eve's mood soured instantly at the sight of Rex and Kate, blatantly stepping closer to Mark. Mark greeted them casually. What brings you guys here? Robot responded. We were dispatched to handle the threat, but it appears you and Adam Eve neutralized it before we arrived. Rex, looking awkward, eyed Eve's suit. So, what's up with the new outfit? Eve didn't even look at him. Just something thoughtful that Mark got me. Silence. Mark internally sighed as the awkward tension grew. Thankfully, Amanda, Monster Girl, broke the ice. She wrapped Mark in a tight hug. Hey, Mark, she said brightly. Mark groaned, covering his face. Why do I even bother with a secret identity anymore? Eve, however, glared at Amanda, confused and slightly irritated. Who is this? Mark exhaled. I guess you didn't notice since she looks different. But, this is Monster Girl. Amanda transformed briefly, but instead of her usual hulking form, her monster form looked smaller and scrawnier than before. Mark blinked. Damn. I didn't account for your monster form getting weaker the older you got. Amanda nodded. Yeah, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. Eve, still confused, asked, Wait, what's going on? Mark explained, I've been working on a cure for Amanda's condition. Every time she transforms, she gets younger. I managed to reverse her aging and restore her correct age. Now, I'm working on a way to permanently fix the curse. Nearby, Robot clenched his fists silently. Mark added, I just got my hands on a rare material that should help with getting her to not lose age as she transforms. Amanda hugged Mark again, this time causing jealousy to flare up, not just from Robot, but from Eve and even Rex. Rex had tried hitting on Monster Girl, seeing her as a total babe now that she was in her adult form. However, all that did was earn him a punch to the face, sending his body flailing from her monster form. That was another reason Robot decided against taking Rex's blood and was more interested in acquiring Mark's. Then, unexpectedly, Black Samson stepped forward. He looked directly at Mark. You fixed Monster Girl's condition. I was wondering if you could fix mine. Mark hesitated, surprised by the request. I can try. I'll stop by Guardians HQ soon and run some scans. Black Samson nodded, trying to keep his hopes in check, but deep down, a flicker of excitement grew. Then, Eve cut in, stepping between Mark and Amanda, grabbing Mark's arm possessively. Mark, let's get back to our lair. Rex, visibly jealous, asked, Eve, can we talk? Eve cut him off immediately. There's nothing to say. And with that, she flew off, pulling Mark with her. Mark glanced back at Amanda and smiled. I'll have good news for you soon. Amanda waved back with a goofy sweet smile, but Robot, watching from the shadows, burned with frustration. His mind raced. He needed Mark's DNA. But every attempt to extract it had failed. His nanobots couldn't cut through Mark's hair. They couldn't pierce his skin. And skin cells wouldn't be enough. Robot's opticals narrowed. I need to find a way to get his DNA. Because if he wanted Amanda, he needed to be just like Mark. The battle was over. The city was safe. Eve had been placated with ice cream. Mark flew through the sky, making his way home. Eve's suit had worked exceptionally well. More than he had expected. The adaptive transformation system and the hard light shielding, all of it functioned seamlessly. And her enthusiasm was contagious. She was beyond excited about its capabilities. As he descended toward his house, he was ready for a quiet night, but the moment he landed on the front doorstep and opened the door, he instantly regretted coming home. Mark's superhuman senses picked up everything immediately. The faint scent of sweat and pheromones still lingered in the air. The way the couch cushions looked a little too fluffed up. The floor had been wiped down hastily. The subtle but distinct rush of wind from a super-speed cleaning job. Mark's brain shut down as he stared at his now very suspiciously casual parents, sitting together on the couch like a couple of teenagers caught breaking curfew. Nolan, looking far too composed, leaned back, arms spread across the couch. Debbie, sitting next to him, pretended to be reading a magazine, flipping a page way too quickly. For a few long, excruciating seconds, there was silence. Mark's face remained blank as he just stared at them. Finally, in the flattest, most deadpan voice possible, he spoke. "I'm moving out." Without waiting for a response, he turned around and walked straight to his room. As he disappeared down the hall, Debbie whispered to Nolan, "Do you think he noticed?" Nolan, crossing his arms, smirked confidently. "I don't think so." Both of them sat completely oblivious to the fact that Mark absolutely noticed. Mark entered his room, rubbing his face in exasperation. "I did not need to know that." Shaking his head, he turned his focus towards something more important, moving out. "It's about time I left anyway." He had already built up his company, established a secure lab, and developed a private place for research and training. There was no reason for him to stay at his parents' house anymore. But before finishing his move, there was something else he needed to check on. Standing in the middle of his room, with the wave of his hand he opened a portal. The fabric of reality warped, revealing a shimmering gateway leading to his private domain, his dimension of solitude. Stepping through, Mark entered his hidden laboratory, a massive space filled with cutting-edge technology, ancient flaxen artifacts, and genetic research. The first thing he saw was the Immortal's body. Lying on a metal examination table, the head and body were separated, but both were preserved perfectly. The Immortal's unique regenerative properties had kept the body from decaying, even in its dormant state. Nearby, on another table, was a prototype wrist device, the one he showed Omniman during their fight, a blue and yellow watch with an hourglass symbol. Mark picked it up. The concept came from the comics, where Rudy, Robot, had built a similar device for Amanda to prevent her from de-aging when she transformed. He had spent countless hours studying the temporal mechanics of the Flaxen Dimension and Monster Girl's blood, analyzing the discrepancies between time flow on different planes of existence and the temporal discrepancies between the blood of her human form and her monster form. By manipulating those principles, he was close to developing a way to halt her biological de-aging. Mark began to work on the device, and after spending 2 entire days in the Flaxen Dimension, working tirelessly without needing to eat or sleep, he had successfully stabilized the device. "This should work for Amanda," Mark stated. His device is now fully capable of halting her de-aging process but allowing her to grow. Mark's eyes then drifted back to the Immortal's body. He had been contemplating what to do with it. The Immortal's genetic structure held the key to biological immortality. If Mark could isolate the correct sequences, he could potentially grant true immortality to others. But the ethical dilemma loomed over him. Immortality isn't a gift. It's a curse. The future version of the Immortal had become unstable, his human mind broken from centuries of loss and war. If those he loved and trusted wished for longer lifespans, he would have used the watch he made for Amanda instead, modifying it to prevent aging rather than preventing de-aging. However, for a regular human, the burden of eternal life could be psychologically devastating. Mark sighed. He made his decision. "I won't grant humans immortality." Instead, he would use his other solutions. He had long ago planned to give the modified watch to his mom for his father. However, he now thinks he could imbue people with Kryptonian genetics using the Codex within his soul. The Codex contained the genetic templates of all Kryptonian bloodlines throughout history. With it, Mark could theoretically transform other beings into Kryptonians themselves, granting them long lives, enhanced abilities, and even resistance to the mental strain of immortality. Mark thinks this would be a better choice for his mom, as being ageless could still mean you die, and her mental faculties would be better off with an enhanced Kryptonian brain, which could handle having a long lifespan. And with yellow sun-fueled Kryptonian bodies, they would be able to handle immortality. But it would always be a choice. And he needed to ensure there was a way to undo it if someone ever wished to return to normal. That's a task for the future, Mark thought. Now that he had completed Amanda's watch, he could focus on moving out. Using superspeed, Mark began packing up his belongings, transferring them one by one to his private quarters within his company's headquarters. Within minutes, the room was completely empty. Carrying one last box, Mark walked downstairs, where Debbie and Nolan were waiting. Debbie's eyes softened as she saw the boxes. "Mark, you don't have to go." Nolan, meanwhile, looked suspiciously pleased. Mark raised an eyebrow. "I really think you two need more space for each other." Debbie's face turned red, while Nolan smirked knowingly. "Mark's all grown up now," Nolan said smoothly. "He's more than capable of living on his own." Debbie sighed before placing both hands on Mark's face. "Fine, but you better keep visiting us." Mark chuckled. "Of course." Debbie smiled. "And you'll have to show us your new place." Yeah, he said with a smirk before turning toward the door. "I'll see you guys later." As Mark flew off, Nolan wrapped an arm around Debbie's waist, pulling her close. His voice turned flirtatious. "At least now we have the whole house to ourselves." Debbie let out a small giggle as Nolan swept her off her feet, carrying her upstairs in a blur of motion. The house, once filled with Mark's presence, now belonged entirely to them. And neither of them wasted a second of it. A month had passed since I moved out, and life had been eventful, to say the least. Balancing hero work, running a company, and keeping up with my friends was a lot easier when you had super speed and a dimension where time moved slower. If I ever needed an extra week to finish a project, I could just step into my personal dimension for a few seconds. Time management was hardly an issue when I could cheat physics. During the month, I invited my parents over for dinner at my new place, my private floor at Invincible Incorporated. I showed them around, letting them take in the luxury: guest rooms, a private office, a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, a hot tub, a theater, a pool room, a gaming lounge, and my own lab. Nolan seemed proud, in his own quiet way, while Debbie kept sneaking looks between me and Eve, her expression a little too amused. "You just had to leave the house so soon, huh?" Debbie teased as she looked around my new place, arms folded as she exchanged a look with Eve. "Or maybe it wasn't just to give us space you were after." "Mom." I groaned, running a hand through my hair, already feeling the heat rise to my face. Eve, despite her usual confidence, also looked flustered, clearing her throat and very intently focusing on setting down the silverware. Nolan just chuckled, clearly enjoying my suffering. "Traitor." "I have to say, Mark, this is an impressive space," he admitted, eyeing my private floor with a knowing expression. "You went all out. Maybe I'll have to take a company from one of my villains." "I told you I wasn't moving out for anything other than to give you two privacy," I said, trying to shift the conversation. Debbie just hummed, unconvinced and with a red face. I took a bite of my food and gave Eve a quick glance. We were spending lots of time together, helping manage the company, working on our humanitarian projects, and doing hero work together. It wasn't like we were dating, but I wasn't stupid. I knew where this was going. And so did my mom. Eve, being no help at all through the teasing, just smiled at Debbie. "Well, it is nice to have a professional space for our work and a personal space to get away from my parents. We're making real progress on everything." That was true. Between balancing hero work, running our business, and managing our projects, things were moving faster than ever. The Fluid Fabric pre-order line had been launched for hospitals, police, and the GDA, finally bringing in income for the company. Eve also used her powers to supply free food to shelters and partnered with local farms, creating plants and ensuring affordable, abundant food for struggling communities. Eve and I would sell food for much cheaper than should be possible, but since there is no production cost due to Eve's powers, we could afford to do so. We didn't want to sell high to make it more accessible, but we needed some money to open up facilities across the world as places to give out free food to the public. Eve also has been studying a lot about business in preparation for her new role as head of the resources department of the company and plans to get a business degree at Upstate U, which she plans to attend with me. Our company was growing, and with it, so was our impact across the world. But despite all the professional success, there were personal matters to deal with. One of them being Monster Girl. Amanda stood in Mark's dimension of solitude, staring at the strange, alien landscape around her. Towering red mountains, shimmering crystal fields, and floating AI drones roamed the vast artificial world Mark had created. The drones were designed after the Superman robots he remembered from modern media. He made them using his knowledge of Kryptonian robotics, but the only difference from the Superman robots was instead of the House of El symbol, they had the Viltrumite symbol. This place is unreal. Amanda muttered as Mark led her toward the main laboratory, where a device sat waiting for her. A sleek, yellow and blue wristwatch with an hourglass symbol rested on a high-tech platform. "This is for you," Mark said, gesturing to it. "Once you put it on, it'll stabilize your body. No more de-aging every time you transform." Amanda reached out, hesitant, before slowly picking up the watch. She stared at it, taking in the intricate designs before sliding it onto her wrist. "That's it?" she asked. Mark nodded. "Try transforming." Taking a deep breath, Amanda shifted. Her form grew in size, muscles expanding as her monstrous figure emerged. But this time, she didn't feel the familiar pull, the sensation of losing years of her life. She looked at Mark, eyes wide. "It worked." Mark smirked. "Of course it did." Amanda flexed her arms, testing out her monstrous strength before reverting to human form. A weight lifted from her chest. "You don't know how much this means to me." But then she frowned, looking at her hands. "The only issue is, I've lost strength." Mark sighed. "Yeah. Since your body reverted to 24, your monster form is weaker than before. But I might have a solution." Amanda perked up. "What kind of solution?" Mark smirked. "I can modify the watch so that while your human form stays at 24, your monster form continues to develop naturally over time. You'll also be able to work out in that form and keep the gains." Amanda blinked, processing his words. "So, I'd still get stronger." "Exactly." For a moment, Amanda just stared at him. Then, she lunged forward and pressed her lips against his. Mark stiffened at the suddenness before relaxing into the kiss. They continued making out for a while, passionately crossing tongues with each other. "Thank you," she whispered after pulling back. "Seriously." Mark, in a daze, just responded, "Why yeah, no problem." Amanda seemed really grateful, then, hesitant about something. They were all alone in Mark's dimension of solitude. "So, time here works differently, right?" she asked, eyes gleaming with interest. "Yeah," Mark nodded. 10 minutes in the real world is about a year here." Amanda blinked. "A year?" Mark smirked at her stunned expression. "Yeah. It's useful when I need time to think, or work on something without the world noticing I'm gone." Amanda's expression shifted. She was inwardly thinking this would be a good place for some privacy together for a while, but after a moment, she knew she had to go back to her home and prepare herself if she wanted to stay. Amanda just nodded cryptically. "Good to know." Mark had a feeling that the conversation wasn't over. Mark had already helped Amanda, but there was another guardian who needed assistance. Black Samson. Ever since losing his powers, Samson had been struggling to keep up with the new generation of heroes. That's why he built a restoration chamber. He built a chamber that would put Samson in a near-death state by depriving him of oxygen and shocking him with high-voltage electricity, essentially jump-starting his powers. It was a gamble, but it was the best chance he had. "You sure about this?" Mark asked as Samson stood in front of the machine. Samson clenched his fists. "I have to be. I won't be dead weight anymore." Mark sighed, stepping back. "All right. Just brace yourself." The process wasn't painless. Samson screamed as his body convulsed, the machine draining oxygen before sending a massive electrical charge through his system. The pain was overwhelming, but then, something clicked. His body absorbed the energy. Samson gasped, eyes snapping open. Power surged through his veins. His lost strength had returned, stronger than ever. Mark helped him out of the chamber, watching as Samson flexed his hands. "How do you feel?" Samson grinned. "Better than ever." He turned to Mark, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "I owe you, Invincible. If you ever need anything at all, you call on me." Mark nodded. "You got it." A month of preparation had led to this moment. Mark, knowing that Angstrom Levy's appearance was imminent, increased surveillance on the Mahler twins, who were locked up in GDA cells after their last failed bank heist by none other than Yevon himself. And when the moment came, he was ready. Mark's POV. I had been monitoring the Mahler twins for weeks, waiting for the inevitable. And today, it happened. My Overwatch computer pinged. I turned toward the holographic screen, watching as two glowing green portals formed in the Mahler cells and they walked through them. I waited for a little bit so that the trackers I implanted into their skin during the time Eve and I took them down would indicate when they would return to this dimension. Then, their location reappeared at a warehouse. It's time. I blasted off, soaring through the sky toward the warehouse where Angstrom Levy had brought the Mahler twins. By the time I arrived, the Mahler twins were talking with him, asking him what he needed them for. I didn't hesitate. In a blur, I moved behind them, tapping their necks with just enough force to knock each of them out. Levy had no time to react before I was on him. His eyes widened in shock before I knocked him out too. No dangerous supervillain today, buddy, I muttered excitedly. Opening a portal, I dragged his unconscious body through, straight into my dimension, leaving the Mahler twins face-planted on the floor. By the time Levy woke up, he was strapped to an examination table, locked inside a containment cell. One designed to block interdimensional travel. Even I couldn't use magic to portal out of it, but I wasn't sure if it would work with Angstrom's abilities. If this worked, he was trapped. His eyes darted around in panic. Where am I? I stood outside the cell, arms crossed. Somewhere safe. Levy's face twisted in confusion, then rage. What did you do to me? I spoke plainly. Let's just say, I need your powers more than you do. This wasn't the most ethical thing I'd done, but I needed his abilities. And I couldn't afford to let him roam free. So, I had to place Levy into a medically induced coma, ensuring he wouldn't be able to escape and I could work in peace. I surrounded him with scanners, 4 lines, and containment fields built using my Kryptonian knowledge of biology, technology, and medicine. My machines, made for genetic engineering, analyzed his DNA, pinpointing the gene responsible for his dimension hopping. Previously, months of research in the Flaxen dimension studying human genetics and Kryptonian genetic engineering had led to this moment. Now, after a few weeks of recording everything I could about Angstrom's biology, I built 2 chambers, one to splice Levy's DNA and extract the gene granting him his powers, the other strong enough to affect even Viltrumite biology and infuse those genes into me. I had some trouble substituting some Kryptonian technology for Flaxen, but I got the necessary components together. But, before I could begin the process, I had to spend a long time draining myself of my solar levels to weaken my Kryptonian abilities. To do this I spent a long time shooting my heat vision into space, but the time it was taking to do so would be too long for me to patiently do. So I resorted to something I didn't think I would be pushed to use for a while. Superman's solar flare. On paper the technique seemed pretty easy. Pushing out all your solar energy stores into an omnidirectional attack. So I did just that. I went out into space, taking a deep breath before doing so, and dug deep within myself. Feeling the energy in my body, I began to push it all out, causing my body to deplete my energy levels and explode in light like a star. After doing so I felt myself get dramatically weaker. I hadn't felt this weak in a while, but it seems like I'm still pretty strong. My half-Viltrumite physiology continued adapting my strength, so even without my half-Kryptonian physiology being fueled by a yellow sun, I'm still stronger than my father. When everything was ready, I placed Angstrom in his chamber before climbing into my own and pressing a button on the inside. This closed both of our chambers, starting up the machines and initiating the process. Levy screamed awake, agony contorting his features as the machine forcibly spliced his very DNA and stripped his abilities. I felt a moment of pity, but I didn't stop it. Then it was my turn. The pain was unbelievable, like my body was being torn to shreds and rewritten on an atomic level. My muscles seized as though they were locked in place. I had to build the machine strong enough to bypass my smart atom's resistances and force them to accept and adapt to the new gene, but that brought about unimaginable pain. Not so ashamed to say I blacked out at moments. And then, it was over. The machine powered down, and I stayed still for a long moment before picking myself up and staggering forward, sweating for the first time in a long while. My breath hitched as I raised my hand, and without the use of my magic, I willed a green portal open. Poking my head through the other side, I saw a familiar red sky. The Flaxen dimension. But there were differences, specifically the people who were looking at the portal. In this dimension, the Flaxans were still alive. Pulling back my head and willing the portal away. I clenched my fist, my heart pounding. It worked. I now had the power to go beyond just the invincible universe. Levi, meanwhile, groaned on the table, weak and powerless. His eyes, once filled with intelligent arrogance, now only reflected despair. "What did you do to me?" I met his glare without flinching. "I took your powers." His face twisted in rage. "You stole them." "You had no right," I cut him off. "You weren't equipped to handle them. I know what you would have done. In the future you would have gone on to cause a war, killing millions of people for the sake of revenge on one single person that caused you harm." Levi's rage turned to confusion. What are you talking about? What war?" "That doesn't matter anymore because without your powers that future will be prevented and I will use them for a better cause." I told him. I sort of embellished the truth since that was a different variant of Angstrom. Or, was it because I'm the different variant? Either way, it was a possible future, so it technically wasn't a lie. He kept shouting at me, cursing my name. I ignored him. I didn't want to kill him, as he was the Angstrom who hadn't turned completely evil, but I couldn't leave him here either. I'd use my new powers to find a dimension for him, somewhere peaceful, where he couldn't cause harm. But this was the beginning point of new adventures across the multiverse for me. In the desolate expanse of his dimension of solitude, Mark stood amidst the barren wasteland, the silence around him profound. Angstrom Levi was placed back into a deep coma within his cell, monitored vigilantly by the ever-watchful Invincibots. Mark came to this wasteland in order to test the new ability gained from Levi. Mark hadn't brought himself out here just for the quiet. He was here to test the new power he'd taken from Levi. And even now, he could feel it thrumming beneath his skin, foreign but not unfamiliar. The gene transfer hadn't just changed his biology, it had changed his perception. Somehow, the moment he absorbed Angstrom's dimensional abilities, the knowledge came with it. It wasn't like learning a new language. It was more like suddenly remembering one he didn't know he knew. He could now sense the structure of the multiverse and feel its subtle shifts. When he opened a portal, he instinctively received, essentially, a snapshot of the dimension he was about to step into, a mental overview of the planet he'll land on, its key features, and how it differed from his own dimension. He can even do this better than Levi could do to his enhanced brain. Still, there were rules. Limitations. He couldn't hop around within the same dimension using Levi's portals. They were purely interdimensional. And every portal always opened in the same spatial location, so if he opened one on Earth, he'd arrive at the equivalent location in that dimension. Kind of rigid, but honestly, that was fine. All he really needed was access to other fictional universes. Everything else, traveling within a dimension, he could handle with his body or by using his own portal magic. Mark's teleportation and portal magic operated differently from Levi's portal abilities. Because, while he could teleport within a single dimension, crossing into different dimensions required Levi's abilities. This distinction stemmed from the nature of his powers. Unlocking the Kryptonian Magi gene from the Codex had granted Mark access to magical energy, or mana, a constant force permeating the universe. His body absorbed and stored this mana, with his capacity increasing as he aged. His portal magic, a fundamental application of dimensional magic, was basic and not limited to the Kryptonian Magi. Lots of mystics from different corners of the DC universe used portal magic. Even the Homo Magi could do so. Kryptonian magic was a realm apart, seldom utilized by Mark except for healing purposes. His ability to heal his father, Nolan, and Alan was actually a manifestation of Kryptonian magic. Historically, Krypton harbored a group of mystics in a secluded valley known as the Valley of Juru. This valley radiated concentrated magical energy, granting those exposed to the energy for a long time the capability to learn magic. These individuals diverged from Krypton's focus on science and immersed themselves in magical studies, eventually identifying as the Kryptonian Magi. They categorized their practices into 4 elemental disciplines: air, water, fire, and earth. A practitioner's classification depends on their affinity and mastery over these elements, with some adept in multiple disciplines. Thanks to the Codex, Mark had the genetic potential to wield all 4. But he knew his strengths were strongest in the air element, likely because it was the one he had practiced the most. As an air magi, Mark possessed abilities such as healing, the skill he used to heal Nolan and Alan, purification, air manipulation, and object creation. Fire Magi, in addition to healing, could restore a Kryptonian's powers, manipulate fire, and dispel magical spells. Water Magi had healing capabilities, could possess individuals, exert mind control, induce temporal stasis, manipulate water in its various forms, and transfer essences or emotional qualities. Earth Magi, while lacking the ability to heal others, could self-heal, produce, and transform into sunstones and other materials, manipulate earth, and craft weapons and armor. It was a lot. A whole other world of abilities inside him, waiting to be explored. But for now, he focused on his dimensional abilities. Mark started opening small rifts, peering through the swirling green portals. At first, all he saw were different versions of the Flaxen homeworld. That made sense. He was still in their dimension. Across the multiverse, their world probably occupied similar spatial coordinates. So he decided to portal back to Earth. With the use of his magic, Mark disappeared from the wasteland and reappeared on the rooftop of his company headquarters. Mark's use of magic to travel between the Flaxen dimension and Earth is only possible due to his familiarity with both. At first, he just used the device he built to travel between the two, but after spending time in both, he was used to the dimensional signature of both, allowing him to travel there. It also helped with both being in the same multiverse. Standing beneath the open sky, he activated Levi's powers again and opened a portal, this time to alternate Earths. That's when things got interesting. One portal showed a version of Canon Invincible standing beside Omni-Man, ruling over a conquered Earth. Another showed Canon Invincible bloodied and defiant, stopping Nolan's attempted takeover. There were even stranger ones, realities where he, the reincarnated Mark, became a tyrant. Intriguingly, these counterparts possessed Kryptonian abilities, suggesting they had the Codex, but seemed unable to acquire Levi's powers, possibly due to the absence of a Levi with powers in their universes or the differing circumstances of their universe. Observing these alternate selves was a profound experience. Some versions of him lacked empathy, wielding their powers selfishly, while others dedicated themselves to the betterment of the universe. There were also those who prioritized personal relationships, choosing not to interfere with worldly affairs, with some even seeking ways to relinquish or seldom use their powers. One particular vision stood out. A version of himself who, alongside the immortal Eve, stood together at the end of time, witnessing the universe's rebirth. No words were spoken. Just the weight of eternity shared between two people who chose each other. This introspection prompted Mark to reflect on his own path. He wasn't sure what his future would hold, but he'll continue to live in the present and have a nice future like the one he saw. Eventually, Mark opened another portal, one that led far beyond anything related to his own universe. And what he saw next made him grin like a kid. Mark saw a red and blue-clad web-slinger battling a Mun with mechanical tentacles attached to his back, exchanging quips amidst the chaos. A surge of excitement coursed through Mark as he recognized the scene. Memories flooded back of reading Spider-Man comics and watching The Spectacular Spider-Man. Spider-Man had always been among his top heroes, alongside the Flash and Superman, embodying an unyielding will to persevere despite life's adversities. Mark leaned forward, eyes wide. No way. It brought back everything, memories of lying in a hospital bed in his old life, reading comics, watching Spectacular Spider-Man, and wishing he could be like Peter Parker. Not because of the powers, but because of the heart. The way he kept going, no matter how many times he was knocked down by life. That kind of strength would always mean more to Mark than super speed or flight. He remembered in the show when Spider-Man was trapped under a large machine and could have just given up when he was tired, but he pushed through just to save Gwen Stacy. Seeing him now, alive and moving, was surreal. The multiverse really is endless, he thought. And now, it was his to explore. He made a mental note: find a good world for Angstrom. Something quiet, peaceful. Somewhere the guy could start over without being a threat. After all, Mark didn't hate him. He just couldn't let him keep that kind of power. The weeks that followed were packed. Mark balanced school, company work, and hero stuff with Eve like a pro. His time in the Flaxen dimension, combined with his super speed, gave him all the hours in the day he needed. Eve took the lead on community outreach, building food programs, and coordinating disaster response efforts. And their company? It was thriving. Then graduation day arrived. Mark, Eve, Amber, and William all stood in the crowd, caps on, waiting to be called. Mark had always been a good student, even before his powers. But with his heightened intellect, senior year had been a breeze. Still, it was an accomplishment, one he was proud of. After the ceremony, he spotted his parents in the crowd and made his way over. Debbie pulled him into a hug the second she saw him. "You did it," she said, beaming. "I'm so proud of you." "Careful," Nolan said with a smirk. "Don't hurt our baby boy." Debbie rolled her eyes. "He's literally indestructible." Nolan grinned. "I meant the second baby." Mark blinked. "Wait, what?" Debbie hesitated, then laughed. "Surprise. I'm pregnant. About 3.5 weeks." Mark's jaw dropped. "Seriously?" She nodded. "And if it's a boy, we're naming him Oliver. After my dad. Olivia if it's a girl." Mark chuckled. It was another sign of how far things had diverged from the original timeline. In the comics, he had a Thraxan half-brother. But here, he was getting a human Viltrumite sibling. Before the moment could settle, Nolan's GDA communicator buzzed. He answered with a sigh. Cecil's voice came through, crackling. "Doc Seismic's broken out again. You're up." On it, Nolan replied with a huff, already floating into the air. "I'll drop Debbie off first." They flew off, leaving Mark to meet up with his friends. William left with his parents. Amber had plans to celebrate with her family on the weekend, and Eve, well, she didn't talk to her family much anymore. So it ended up being just the three of them, Mark, Eve, and Amber, heading back to his place. Amber had never seen where Mark and Eve lived, and she was curious. Once they arrived, they let loose, throwing a low-key celebration for themselves. Karaoke, snacks, and laughter filled the air of Mark's theater room. At one point, Mark took the mic and started singing Love by Keisha Cole. And he nailed it. Both girls stared, wide-eyed, caught off guard by how good he was. "Okay," Amber said as he finished. "Why didn't I know you could sing?" "Seriously," Eve added, smiling. "That was amazing." Mark shrugged, blushing a little. "I dunno. I never really tried before." Amber smiled, then threw a look Eve's way. "What do you say? Hot tub?" Eve hesitated for a second, then nodded, a bit shy. "Yeah, sounds nice." Mark, oblivious to the silent exchange between the girls, led them to the guest room to grab swimsuits. A few minutes later, he was the first one in the tub, enjoying the calm. The heat didn't bother him, but the atmosphere, the peacefulness, that was something he could get used to. When Amber and Eve entered the room, he looked up and smiled. They were both stunning. Eve wore a pink tube top suit that complemented her perfectly, and Amber's violet one-piece gave her a graceful presence. Mark, feeling a sense of calm, just looked at both girls. "You guys both look amazing." Amber and Eve smiled at that before dipping themselves into the hot tub on either side of Mark. The air was warm, the water soothing, and for a few moments, none of them said anything, enjoying the surrounding company. Amber and Eve looked at each other across Mark's chest, realizing that now was the time. Flashback. Amber and Eve had already decided to meet up with each other after Mark ended up joining them on their college tour and told them about how he and the other Viltrumites would have to focus on repopulating the Empire on Earth. They ended up meeting at Amber's house when her family wasn't home. Amber, taking in a breath, started off the discussion. "I don't know if you know this, but I've been sleeping with Mark." This threw Eve for a loop and she didn't respond immediately, and Amber hurried to explain, it wasn't some casual fling. "I mean, it started that way because, well, we didn't think a relationship made sense, you know? His lifespan, his powers, his responsibilities. He tried to push me away. Said it wouldn't be fair to me." "And you didn't agree?" Amber gave a dry smile. "At first, I did. I told myself I could handle it. That I could just be someone in his life for now. That even if he outlived me, even if we weren't together, I'd still matter to him." She looked down at her hands. "But I was lying to myself." Eve's expression softened. "The more time we spent together, the way he talked to me, how he looked at me like I was his anchor to a normal life, it changed how I felt. I fell for him, Eve. Hard." Amber looked up, her eyes clearer now. And I don't want to give that up. Even if I do die before him. Even if he has to move on one day. I want to be part of his life while I can. I want. She hesitated. I want to give him something lasting. A child. Someone who'll live on, even if I don't. The words hung in the air like thunderclouds. Eve felt her throat tighten. Are you serious? She asked gently. Amber met her gaze without flinching. Yeah. I am. And I know what that means. I know I'll probably have to share him, because this isn't just about us. It's about his people. His future. And I'm okay with that. There was silence again, but this time it felt heavier, more intimate. The truth had been laid bare between them. Amber tilted her head. What about you, Eve? How do you feel about him? Eve looked down, fiddling with the hem of her shirt, her heart thudding in her chest. I love him. Amber didn't react, just waited, listening. It's not just admiration or a crush, Eve continued, her voice shaking a little. It's the way he's always treated me like an equal. The way he believes in me. He's been this light in my life, even when everything else felt dark. With my parents, with Rex, with everything going on in the world, he's just always there. Solid. Real. Amber gave her a small smile, but there was still one more question hanging between them. Do you love him enough to share him? Eve looked up at her hesitantly, but not angry. Just thoughtful. She thought of Rex. Of how he'd cheated, how he'd lied. How he'd promised monogamy and broken it without a thought. Rex hurt me because he pretended I was the only one, Eve said. He said I was everything to him while he was sneaking around behind my back. Amber nodded, quietly understanding. But with Mark, Eve went on, I'd know from the beginning what I was getting into. He's honest. He doesn't hide his intentions. He's already said he's not sure what the future holds, but he'd never lie about it. She looked away for a moment, then back at Amber. So yeah. I'd rather be part of something honest with Mark than lie to myself in a relationship built on promises someone's not going to keep. Amber's smile grew, bittersweet but warm. Then I guess, we're doing this together. Eve laughed softly, shaking her head. This has got to be the weirdest heart-to-heart I've ever had. Amber smirked. Yeah, but at least we're not fighting over him like some bad reality show. Eve raised an eyebrow. Not yet. They both burst into laughter then, an honest, relieved kind of laughter that came from two girls who had just stepped over a cliff together and found solid ground on the other side. No drama. No cruelty. Just truth. Flashback end. Mark sat in silence for a long moment, staring down at the rippling water. Amber and Eve had just told them about their conversation. He felt his chest tighten, not in panic, but something more powerful. Gratitude. Awe. Love. He looked at Amber first. You bring peace into my life. A sense of normalcy, even when everything around me is chaos. Just doing the little things with you, grabbing food, watching movies, walking through a park, it reminds me that I'm still human. And that means more to me than I can explain. Then he turned to Eve. And you've always been right there, even when things got crazy. You've supported my decisions, challenged me when I needed it, and stood by me through things most people would run from. I don't think I'd be half the person I am today without you in my corner. His voice dipped just slightly, the weight of the moment settling into the steam. I love both of you. And I know this won't always be easy. But if you're both sure, if this is what you want, then I want to be with you. I want us. For a heartbeat, no one said anything. Then Amber's eyes shimmered as she reached for his hand. Eve followed a breath later, sliding hers into his other. They squeezed in unison. Yes, Amber whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Eve echoed, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mark leaned in and kissed Amber first, gentle, meaningful, before turning to Eve, pressing his forehead to hers for a moment before brushing a kiss to her lips. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't messy or wild. It was honest. Breaking away from the kiss, Mark stood up and lifted both girls with each arm, taking them back to his room and laying them down on his bed. Both looked incredibly sexy and he'll take both of them right now. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Mark's master bedroom, casting a golden hue across the bed's soft sheets. The hum of the city below was distant, muffled by the height of the building. His private floor was quiet, a world apart from the chaos Mark and Eve usually dealt with. Mark stirred first, basking in the morning light. He was warm, but not just from the sun. Eve was curled against his left side, her arm draped over his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Amber was tucked into his right, her head resting just below his shoulder, a small smile still lingering on her lips from whatever dream she was having. A soft, contented sigh escaped him. Eve was the first to speak, her voice still a little groggy. "That was amazing." Amber giggled softly as she opened her eyes. "Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't felt this happy in a long time." Mark let out a small laugh, brushing some of Eve's hair from her face and kissing her forehead. "I'm glad. I honestly didn't expect last night to go the way it did. But I wouldn't change a thing." Eve stretched a little before propping herself up on one elbow, her fingers trailing gently across Mark's chest. "Me neither." Amber nodded in agreement. "Definitely." But the peaceful air was suddenly pierced by Eve's next question, casually dropped into the silence like a stone in a still lake. "So, who else have you slept with?" Mark blinked, his smile faltering slightly. He glanced at both of them. Eve raised an eyebrow. Amber smirked, clearly amused. "I mean," Eve continued, sitting up a little more, "I'm not mad or anything. But if we're doing this, us, together, I think we should be honest." Mark sighed, then ran a hand through his hair. "Okay. Fair." Amber nudged him playfully. "Come on, playboy. Spit it out." Mark gave a sheepish chuckle. "Well, obviously, Amber. And now you," he said, glancing at Eve. "But aside from you two, Amanda." Eve's eyes widened slightly. "Amanda? As in, Monster Girl Amanda?" "Yeah," Mark replied, a little embarrassed. "It wasn't a relationship or anything. The first time was after I helped her with the de-aging issue. I think it was her way of showing appreciation. But we hung out a few times after that, and it just kind of happened." Eve raised her eyebrows. "So that's why she was all over you last time." Mark gave a small, guilty smile. "Yeah, sorry. I didn't really know how to bring it up. Wasn't sure it'd come up at all." Eve leaned back against the pillows, looking thoughtful more than anything else. "You two did seem close. I remember her hugging you like it was second nature." Amber turned toward Eve. "So, how do you feel about it?" Eve gave a shrug. "Honestly? I don't mind. I knew what I was signing up for when we agreed to this. What about you?" Amber answered thoughtfully. "I don't mind as well. So long as you are honest about whoever you bring into our life." Eve nodded, her tone serious. "Exactly. But there's a limit, Mark." Amber crossed her arms, looking stern as well. "Yeah. No harem of a dozen girls, okay?" Mark held his hands up. "I promise. I'm not trying to build a space empire of girlfriends or anything." Eve raised an eyebrow. "Yet." "Hey." Mark laughed, leaning forward to kiss her gently. Then he turned and kissed Amber too. "You two mean everything to me. I'll be careful. I swear." Amber rolled her eyes but smiled. "You better." Eve leaned back again, finally relaxing. "Okay. So now that that's out of the way, what do we do today?" Mark grinned. "Well, first, we eat. I don't know about you two, but I'm starving." "I could go for waffles," Amber said. "Waffles sound amazing," Eve agreed. "I'll have those ready while we shower," Mark said, already reaching for his phone. "Let me summon my food bots." Amber groaned with a laugh. "Of course, you have food bots. What, you think I'm gonna cook after saving the world every other day?" Mark teased. Eve laughed. "Fair point." After a nice breakfast with Eve and Amber, Mark escorted Amber back to her house. Standing on her doorstep, he leaned in, sharing a passionate kiss with his new girlfriend. Amber smiled warmly before stepping inside, leaving Mark with a contented grin as he ascended into the sky. As he soared above the city, a persistent beeping emanated from his wristwatch. Activating the device, a holographic news report projected before him, displaying chaotic scenes of Atlantean soldiers attacking coastal cities. Buildings lay in ruins, civilians fled in terror, and local heroes valiantly attempted to repel the invaders. Amidst the turmoil, an Atlantean soldier's voice rang out clearly, "We seek the one who killed our king." Mark's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly who they were referring to. Without hesitation, he altered his course, heading straight for his parents' home. Upon arrival, Mark entered to find his father, Nolan, already clad in his Omni-Man uniform. Debbie, his mother, was engaged in a heated argument with Cecil Stedman, the director of the Global Defense Agency. Sensing the tension, Mark interjected. "What's going on?" Cecil turned to him, his expression grave. "If you've seen the news, you know the Atlanteans are waging war against the surface. They're demanding the one responsible for their king's death." Nolan's face was a mixture of frustration and guilt. Debbie crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "And according to some stupid Atlantean law, the killer must marry the king's widow and assume the throne." Cecil nodded. "That's correct. That's why I want to send Nolan to them." Debbie's eyes flashed with anger. "There's no way I'm sharing my husband with a fish queen. That plan can go to hell." Cecil sighed. This situation wouldn't have arisen if Nolan hadn't killed the Guardians. Nolan's jaw tightened, the weight of his past actions pressing heavily upon him. Mark stepped forward, determination in his voice. "Dad and I should meet with the Queen and negotiate. There has to be a peaceful resolution." Cecil considered this. "Fine. But if negotiations fail, Mark, you need to ensure your father takes responsibility." With that, he teleported away. Debbie placed a hand on Mark's arm, her voice softening. "Please, make sure our family remains intact." Before her tone changed into a threatening tone, "If my unborn baby has a fish stepmom, we'll end up having sashimi for dinner." Mark nodded a little nervously at the homicidal intent leaking from his mom. "We will." Father and son flew to the GDA headquarters, where Cecil awaited with 2 Atlantean guards. Nolan addressed them directly. "I am the one who killed your king. Take us to your queen." The guards exchanged glances before pointing their spears at the duo, gesturing for them to follow. They boarded an Atlantean vessel that flew across the city and then submerged, descending into the ocean's depths toward Atlantis. As they neared the underwater city, Mark discreetly released nanobots from his suit, interfering with Nolan's in-ear comms to prevent Cecil from eavesdropping. Mark's own communication system was custom-built, allowing him to control when he could be reached. For now, he chose silence. Back at the GDA, Cecil frowned at the static in his earpiece. "What's going on with the comms?" An agent responded, "There's interference, likely from Atlantis due to war defenses." Cecil's suspicion grew. He had previously maintained contact with Aquarius in Atlantis without issue. "Deploy drones. I want eyes down there." Before disembarking, the Atlantean guards handed Mark and Nolan rebreathers. Mark examined the devices, impressed by their efficiency in extracting oxygen from water. He made a mental note to study them further for potential space travel applications. They were led into the grand hall of the Atlantean palace. Guards commanded them to bow before the Queen, Aquaria. Both refused, Mark, understanding that a future leader mustn't show subservience when commanded, and Nolan, driven by Viltrumite pride and stubbornness. The guards bristled, ready to enforce their command, but the Queen raised her hand, halting them. Nolan spoke first. "I regret killing your king, but I cannot marry you." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "That barbaric custom is of the past. Your punishment will be trial by combat." Nolan smiled, confident in his abilities. "Perfect. My wife will be happy about this." The Atlanteans brought Nolan before the chained Depth Dweller, a monstrous sea kaiju held captive in a trench within Atlantis. As the horns were played signifying the start of combat, the Depth Dweller lunged at Nolan. As the fight began, it was clear how much better Nolan was compared to Canon Mark at this time. Drawing upon centuries of combat experience, Nolan maneuvered through the water with ease and finesse. The creature's massive pincers snapped close, but Nolan evaded, delivering powerful punches to its armored face. Bubbles erupted around them with each impact, the water distorting the shock waves but not dulling their force. Nolan moved like a spear through the ocean, darting around the beast's limbs with practiced ease. The Depth Dweller roared, its bellow reverberating through the currents as it twisted, swinging one of its enormous claws toward Nolan. He ducked beneath it, looping around and landing a kick to the creature's forearm. There was a cracking sound, muffled by the water. Its arm broke under the pressure. But that only enraged the beast. The Depth Dweller opened its maw and released a pulsating sound wave. It wasn't a roar, it was a weapon. A sonic attack that vibrated through the ocean, distorting everything in its path. Nolan screamed, his hands flying to his ears. Blood trickled from them almost immediately as the high-frequency sound pierced his inner equilibrium. He was thrown off balance, tumbling through the water in a disoriented spin. Mark, watching from the sidelines, winced in pain as the wave reached him too. His hands instinctively rose to cover his ears as his frequency damaged him as well. But unlike Nolan, Mark had more control over his senses. His Kryptonian-enhanced body quickly adapted, filtering the frequency out and dampening the effect. Still, the initial blow had done damage. Nolan, dazed, tried to reorient himself. The Depth Dweller, sensing weakness, struck with its remaining claw, swatting Nolan toward the seafloor. Sand and stone erupted as his body crashed into the ocean bed. But the second the sonic attack stopped, Nolan's eyes flared with determination. He burst forward, trailing Bubbles, no longer holding back. He swerved behind the beast's back, his arms straightened and crossed over his chest, and with one sharp motion, he delivered the infamous Viltrumite chop, a chopping strike that cleaved straight through the creature's uninjured arm. The Depth Dweller screamed again, but this time in pain. Nolan didn't pause. He caught the severed limb mid-float and swung it like a club, smashing it across the beast's head with incredible force. The creature reeled back, disoriented, one limb bleeding out into the deep blue. And then came the finishing blow. With a surge of speed, Nolan shot forward like a torpedo, fists pointed together in front of him. He pierced the creature's chest straight through, exiting the other side in a burst of crimson and shredded flesh. The Depth Dweller let out one last guttural moan before collapsing into the depths, its body slowly descending to the ocean floor like a sinking mountain. Silence returned to the arena. Mark floated forward as the surrounding Atlanteans began murmuring. Most looked shocked. Some booed. Others bowed their heads in solemn respect. The Queen stood slowly, nodding once. "You are free to go." Nolan only nodded, blood still in his ears. Mark drifted beside him, gently grabbing his father's arm. "Come on, let's not stick around," he said. They didn't wait for the escort ship. Together, father and son launched themselves upward, rising steadily toward the surface. As they ascended, Mark was intrigued by their compact design and planned to take both rebreathers they'd been given. He planned to reverse engineer them later to see if their technology could be adapted for zero-atmosphere environments in space. Just before they broke the surface, Nolan held up a hand to stop Mark. He pulled the communicator from his ear, clenching it in his hand to prevent it from picking up their conversation. Unaware that Mark had already disabled his comms, Nolan looked at him seriously. "You were affected by the sound?" Mark nodded. "Yeah. At first. It caught me off guard, but my extra powers let me control my senses pretty well. So I tuned it out pretty quickly." Nolan's brows furrowed. "Still, that kind of weapon hurt a lot and messed with my ability to fly. It seems Viltrumite biology wasn't built for that kind of frequency." Mark tapped on his wristwatch, bringing up a recording. "I saved a sample." A low vibration buzzed from the device, just enough to make Nolan disoriented and wince in pain. "Turn it off," he hissed, and Mark did. "It seems we've found another weakness for Viltrumites," Nolan said. "Just like the Ragnars, the Space Racer's gun, and that plant I encountered when I was still young." Mark's expression turned serious. "We can't tell anyone about this." Nolan agreed. "If the Viltrumites ever come here after we take control, this will cause problems with Cecil and other Earthlings. Good thing the creature is dead." Nolan reinserted his comm. Mark activated the nanobots, restoring its connection. The second they breached the ocean surface, a voice buzzed into Nolan's ear. "Nolan, what's your status?" "Cecil. It's done," Nolan replied. Trial by combat. I won. It's over. There was a pause. Understood. The Atlantean troops are pulling back from the coastlines. Good work. The line went dead. But at GDA headquarters, Cecil sat back in his chair, thoughtful. He was still a little suspicious at the comm's sudden disconnection. Bring up drone footage, he ordered. Several agents worked quickly. The battle played back. Cecil watched as Nolan and Mark both clutched their heads in pain as it seemed like the beast roared before the drones were destroyed during Nolan's fight. No audio, he asked. No, sir, said a technician. The drones weren't built for underwater auditory processing. Cecil narrowed his eyes. Whatever that thing did, it hurt them both. I want that corpse. He slammed his palm on the desk. I want it yesterday. Agents scrambled as Cecil leaned forward, mind already working. He didn't fully trust Mark. He didn't trust Nolan at all. But one thing was clear. The war with Atlantis had ended. But something more prosperous had been uncovered. And Cecil never wasted an opportunity. Cecil's shoes tapped against the hard, cold metal floor as he walked through the hallway of a secret facility. A massive slab of metal at the end of the hallway lifted with a hiss, rising to reveal the concealed entrance to one of the GDA's most classified underground labs, buried deep beneath a remote desert. Beside him, Donald followed silently, his expression unreadable behind his dark sunglasses. A gust of chilled, recycled air hit them as they stepped into the bustling laboratory, the hum of high-voltage machines and the pattering of scientists' feet echoing around them. Tell me it's mostly intact, Cecil muttered. Donald gave a nod. Our agents managed to retrieve the corpse without tipping off Atlantis. Pulled it from one of the deep trenches just beyond the continental shelf. The depth dweller's body is about 60% intact. Damage from Omniman and a few opportunistic bottom feeders, but about half of the internal structures are untouched. Cecil exhaled, half in relief. Good. As long as the sound-emitting organs are intact, the lab boys should be able to pull something from it. I want that noise isolated, recorded, and studied. If it messes with Viltrumites, we need to weaponize it yesterday. Right now, we're relying on a Viltrumite to keep another Viltrumite in check. But we don't know how long it will be until father and son decide to say damn it and betray us. At that moment, footsteps approached. A lanky figure in a lab coat emerged from the rows of high-tech equipment, his face half covered by a surgical mask. D.A. Sinclair, pale, brilliant, and more than a little unnerving, came to a stop in front of them. Director, Sinclair greeted, giving a small nod to both men. I assume you're here about the specimen. Cecil raised an eyebrow. Assume right. Tell me you've got something. Sinclair's eyes darted briefly to the chamber where the depth dweller's body floated in a suspension tank. Unfortunately, reviving it is out of the question. Its cellular degeneration is far too advanced. Standard regenerative protocols won't work. Its physiology is too alien for reanimation techniques, and while I've pioneered the reanimation process, my knowledge is rooted in human anatomy. I can't just rewire a sea monster's brain and expect it to sing the same tune. Cecil pinched the bridge of his nose. Damn. However, Sinclair added, if someone could bridge the physiological gap, translate my methods to suit this specimen's biology, I believe a viable hybrid reconstruction is possible. Cecil smirked faintly, his mind already moving 10 steps ahead. I know just the guy. The air was filled with laughter, the distant echo of a retro arcade game humming under the chatter. Mark's penthouse, sleek and sprawling with floor-to-ceiling views of the city skyline, was alive with the energy of youth and summer freedom. William and his new boyfriend, Rick, were going head-to-head on one of the classic fighting games, their intense button-mashing punctuated by playful insults and victorious whoops. Amber and Eve sat nearby on the plush sofa, their legs tucked under them as they watched the chaos unfold, occasionally tossing popcorn at whoever lost. Mark, meanwhile, stood in the open kitchen, digging through the fridge for another soda. He smiled to himself. This was nice. Spending time relaxing with no inventions and hero work. Just him, his friends, and having a peaceful moment. Hey, Mark. William's voice came from behind him, tight with anxiety. Mark turned to see his friend holding a small, flashing device, his coalition communicator. William kept it pinched between two fingers as if it might explode. This just started beeping on its own, I swear. I didn't touch anything. You remember last time, when I ended up covered in that glowing slime. Still have no idea what that was, by the way. Mark chuckled, walking over casually without a hint of urgency, and joked. You really need to stop messing with my bomb stuff. I didn't touch it. William squeaked, handing the device over like it was radioactive before scrambling back to Rick. Mark shook his head, still grinning, and tapped the side of the device. A holographic feed blinked to life, and Alan the alien's massive eye filled the screen. Hey, Mark. Alan's booming voice crackled through the communicator. Glad to see you're still in one piece after all those Viltrumites showed up. Mark shrugged. Yeah, they weren't much of a problem. Dad and I handled it. Well, good. Because I'm almost in Earth's orbit. You and your dad ready? Mark sighed, already missing the carefree atmosphere of the room. Guess we are now. Alan gave a two-finger salute. See you soon, champ. The feed cut out. Mark turned around and immediately felt the twin stares of his girlfriends. Eve and Amber had approached quietly while he was distracted. Eve was giving him her patented suspicious look, arms folded. Amber just raised a brow, waiting. Mark tried to play it cool. So, I might have to go to space. Again. Eve rolled her eyes. Of course you do. Amber leaned against the counter with a small smirk. You're lucky we're used to this. You're not mad? Mark asked, surprised. Amber shrugged. You're an alien. Comes with the territory. And, Eve added, you literally came back the moment Amber called you last time. That earned you some points. Mark grinned and pulled them both into a hug. You two are the best. We know, they replied in perfect sync, making him laugh. Eve reached up and kissed his cheek. Just promise you'll try to be back in time for the first day of college. I'll do my best. Amber nudged his side playfully. Go kick some alien ass. Mark smirked. I am the alien, remember? Amber rolled her eyes. You know what I mean. With one last kiss for each of them, Mark turned and walked toward the balcony. He changed into his suit, wrapping around him like a second skin. With a final wave, he launched into the sky, a blue and gold streak arcing over the city. But before heading to his parents' house, Mark took a detour. The Guardians of the Globe HQ buzzed with subdued energy in the aftermath of their recent encounter with the Lizard League and their temporary leader, Supreme Lizard, following the death of Queen Lizard and the arrest of King Lizard. The dust from their battle with Supreme Lizard had been settled, but the team was already back on their feet, recovering, regrouping, and preparing for whatever came next. Inside the training wing, Monster Girl was off to the side, stretching out her limbs and practicing yoga poses. Her monster form was almost back to its peak. The absence of her curse, the one that once regressed her age every time she transformed, had given her the freedom to truly push her limits and train her monster form harder than ever before. And she'd been doing exactly that. That's when the sonic boom hit, faint but distinct, signaling someone was approaching the base at speed. Seconds later, a blur of blue and yellow zipped through the main hangar doors, slowing midair to reveal Mark Grayson himself. He landed without ceremony, eyes already scanning the space for someone in particular. Amanda spotted him first. Her expression lit up, genuine, unfiltered joy, and she immediately jogged over to greet him. But before she could reach him, the Guardian's newest member, Bulletproof, shot into her path. Hey, who is this guy? How'd he even get in here? He demanded, placing himself squarely between her and Mark. Amanda blinked, clearly annoyed, and moved right around him. That's Invincible. He has clearance. And more importantly, he's here to see me. Bulletproof frowned, his eyes following her as she latched onto Mark's arm, hugging it close. His jaw clenched. He'd been trying to make headway with Amanda for weeks, always getting shot down or ignored. Now, watching her cozy up to Mark like this? It stung. Black Samson approached, clapping a hand on Bulletproof's shoulder. Don't waste your time. She's been hung up on Invincible for a while now. You're not breaking into that fortress. Yeah, Bulletproof muttered, voice tight. I noticed. Meanwhile, Mark leaned his head toward Amanda, his tone quieter. Hey, can we talk somewhere private? Amanda didn't hesitate. Yeah, of course. Follow me. She led him down a side hallway into her private quarters, a room with reinforced walls, workout equipment, and a modest desk cluttered with files and training logs. As soon as the door shut behind them, she turned, and before Mark could speak, she leaned forward and kissed him. He didn't resist. There was a beat of silence when they pulled apart, Amanda still holding on to his arms. That was nice, Mark said. Yes, it was. So why did you come? Asked Amanda. Well, I wanted to let you know that I have an idea to make your monster form stronger than you could ever imagine. Replied Mark. Wow, that's nice. I'm almost back to my regular strength when my body was like 8, Amanda laughed. Mark looked uneasy, nervous, almost. She sensed it. What's wrong? She asked, stepping back slightly. Did something happen? Mark took a breath. No, well, yes. Sort of. I just wanted to talk to you before I left. Amanda's brow furrowed. Left? Where are you going? I'm heading to space. To Telescria. Alan's coming to pick me and my dad up. We're going to take the next step toward bringing the Viltrum Empire under control. Amanda's eyes widened slightly. You're doing it. Already. He nodded. It's time. She reached up, cupping his face gently. Just, don't die, Mark. He placed a hand over hers, steadying himself. I won't. But, there's more. Something I wanted to tell you. Amanda tilted her head, sensing the shift in tone. I have a girlfriend, Mark started. Amanda froze. And, actually, I have two. Her eyes widened, a few unspoken thoughts flickering behind them. One of them is Eve. You already know her, he continued quickly before she could say anything. And, they both know about you. They know about the time we've spent together, even though we aren't officially together. Amanda tried to find words, blinking in disbelief. Wait, so are you cheating on your girlfriend? What do you mean, too? MIA sighed. No, Mark said, stepping forward, holding both her hands. I'm being honest with all of you. You already know that the Viltrumite Empire will be rebuilding since we're low in numbers. Some of us are going to have to practice polygamy to restore the population. I don't want secrets or lies. I want trust, so I'm telling you now. Both Amber and Eve already know this and about you, so I came to tell you about this before I leave. Amanda looked down, biting her lip, her hands trembling slightly in his. And, Mark added, I came here because I wanted to ask you to be my girlfriend too. A tear slipped from Amanda's eye, and she gave a soft laugh that almost sounded like a sob. So what, you're asking me to be your baby mama? Mark chuckled, a little embarrassed. I was thinking more, future wife. But we can take it one step at a time. Amanda didn't answer right away. Her heart was torn. If it had just been Mark asking her out, she would have said yes without hesitation. But the idea of having to share him, of being one of many, complicated everything. I need time, she finally whispered. I want to say yes, Mark. But, this is a lot. I just need time to think about it. Mark nodded, understanding. That's okay. No pressure. No matter what you decide, I'll always be here for you. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small item, a key. This is to my place. You're always welcome. She took it with both hands, cradling it like something precious. When she looked up again, Mark gave her a soft kiss on the forehead before turning to leave. As he took flight out of the Guardian HQ, Amanda stood alone in her room, staring down at the key, contemplating her future with Mark. Unbeknownst to either of them, Robot was listening in on their conversation. From his private quarters, using an array of discreet surveillance tech, Robot had eavesdropped on the entire conversation. He sat frozen in front of the monitor, expression unreadable due to his metallic face, until his hand curled into a tight fist and slammed against the desk, shattering the small gadget in front of him. He had already committed to Cecil's request. Now, he was more motivated than ever. Mark soared through the sky, leaving the Guardian's base behind him. His heart was a cocktail of emotions, hope, guilt, and determination. Amanda's reaction still lingered in his mind, but he tried not to dwell. He knew it wouldn't be easy asking someone to step into a life like his, especially with the responsibilities of his heritage now weighing heavier than ever. The warm summer sun bathed the city in gold as he descended toward the familiar neighborhood where his parents lived. His body drinking in the sunlight, making him feel good. When he reached the front porch, he could smell something cooking. Pizza. He opened the door without knocking. "I'm home," he called out, a little smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. In the kitchen. Debbie's voice rang out, cheerful. He walked in to find both his parents standing at the kitchen island, hands messy with flour and sauce. Nolan had his sleeves rolled up, his once imposing Viltrumite figure swapped for an image of him wearing an apron that read Grill Daddy. Debbie gave him a quick kiss on the cheek as she slid a pan into the oven. Mark laughed loudly at his father in the apron. Debbie laughed. "Don't mess with your father. He and I decided to do more together. And I bought the apron." Nolan looked up, giving Mark a relaxed smile. "Pizza night. Your mom's idea." "I can tell," Mark said with a smile. "Hey, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Alan's ship is about to hit orbit. He wants us to meet him up there." At that, Nolan's smile faded slightly. His time with his wife being interrupted annoyed him. He had been much more affectionate with Debbie ever since he came clean to her. It was like having a weight off his shoulder. "Right. The coalition," said Nolan. Debbie turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Both of you, be careful, okay?" Nolan nodded and kissed her temple gently. "We will. I promise." He was a little worried about how it would go when they got to Viltrum since they were about to face off against the strongest Viltrumite in history. But he trusted in Mark's strength and extra powers. Mark gave his mom a reassuring hug before stepping outside with his dressed father. Both men took off into the sky, their figures streaking toward the upper atmosphere. As they passed the cloud layer, a sleek coalition cruiser shimmered into view, its surface pulsing with energy as it hovered silently above Earth. The landing ramp extended before they even arrived. Alan stood in front, waving them in. His eye was bright, and his expression, a little nervous. "Mark." "Nolan." Alan greeted, pulling Mark into a brief, tight hug before giving Nolan a more reserved handshake since he was still a little scared of him. "Glad to see you both intact." "Same to you," Mark said, looking at the polished ship interior. "Let's get this show on the road." As the ramp closed behind them, the engines hummed to life, and the ship angled away from Earth, cutting through the stars toward the Coalition homeworld, Telescria. Telescria was full of life, lush continents, towering cities of sleek architecture and glass, and skies filled with peaceful air traffic. Mark leaned forward in his seat, eyes glued to the viewscreen. "So this is the heart of the Coalition?" Alan, sitting at the helm, grinned and gave a proud nod. "Welcome to Telescria. It's the most heavily protected planet in Coalition space, and for good reason. Every decision that shapes our galaxy happens here." Nolan didn't say much as the ship descended. He stood tall and silent beside Mark, his eyes scanning every detail, every potential threat. A Viltrumite warrior through and through, even now he couldn't switch it off. As they docked in one of the central towers, a group of armed Coalition soldiers formed a welcoming escort. Not in an aggressive way, more ceremonial than anything. Mark and Nolan exchanged a look before stepping off the ship. The tower's main hall was massive, polished floors, hanging banners of every Coalition member world, and a circular table in the center surrounded by representatives of over a dozen alien species, each of them unique and strange in their own right. Some had scales, others shells, and a few hovered off the ground entirely. All wore expressions of cautious interest. At the head of the table stood a tall, armored figure with a face covered in a heavy, metallic cowl, Thetis, leader of the Coalition. "Welcome to Telescria," Thetis said in a voice like thunder. "It's an honor to meet you both in person, Mark Grayson and Nolan." Mark stepped forward first and bowed his head slightly. "It's an honor to be here. I'm grateful for everything you've done for the universe so far. I'm ready to do my part." Thetis gave a nod of approval. "You've already done more than most ever could. Your efforts against the Viltrumite scouts saved millions on Earth. And now, we have a champion to challenge the Viltrumite authority. We're also glad to have you here as well." Thetis looked at Nolan. A Viltrumite elite who saw the truth. Who broke from the Empire. Nolan looked around the room before nodding. Earth changed me. My son changed me. Mark glanced at his father briefly. It wasn't often Nolan admitted things like that out loud. Before anyone else could speak, the chamber's main door suddenly exploded inward in a violent burst of smoke and flame. The coalition guards moved instantly, drawing their weapons and surrounding the council members, who rose from their seats in a mixture of shock and anger. Through the thick smoke, a towering figure strode into the room, his arm made of metal, his face scarred, and one of his eyes blinded. Mark's eyes widened in recognition. Behind the towering figure, 4 more figures floated in, each one bearing the same expressionless, imposing aura. "Stand ready for my arrival, worms," said the newly revealed Conquest. Conquest floated there with 4 other nondescript Viltrumites floating behind him. The roof of the chamber exploded inward with a deafening crash, metal and concrete raining down like ash. The coalition guards reached for their weapons, already aiming at the figures descending through the smoke. One led the group, tall, brutal, and unmistakable. "Stand ready for my arrival, worms," said the figure. Nolan's fists clenched at his sides. Conquest. The smoke began to clear, revealing the grinning brute. His face was half-scarred, and one arm gleamed, made entirely of reinforced alloy. A monstrous Viltrumite survivor. A relic of brutality. "If it isn't Nolan," Conquest said, his voice a mocking purr. "I remember when you were young. So much promise. It's a shame to see you throw it all away for this." Conquest's eyes flicked to Mark, and the smile on his face stretched wider. "And you must be the special boy. The Viltrumite, with magic. You look strong as your father. Maybe stronger. Lucky me, I get to kill you." Mark smirked, stepping forward calmly. "You can try." The chamber was on edge. Coalition soldiers, all on high alert. The other 4 Viltrumite warriors behind Conquest stood like statues, ready to pounce. Thetis's voice cut through the rising tension, firm and cold. "You've made a mistake coming here, especially with only 5 soldiers. That may be 1/10 of your empire's strength, but here, you're outnumbered." Conquest scoffed, waving off the threat. "So it seems that Nolan leaked our numbers. Figures. And here I thought he still had some backbone." He turned to Nolan again. "But no matter. 5 are enough. The coalition's always been weak. The only reason we haven't crushed you is because we feared you might use the Scourge virus again. But now that we know Nolan and his son are working with you, it's time to clean house." Mark floated forward, a cocky smile still on his face. "I'll make you a deal, Conquest. Leave. Go back to Viltrum. Wait for us there. Or die here." Conquest burst out laughing. "The ball's on this kid. Nolan, are you proud?" "I am," Nolan said with a smirk. "And you should leave before my son kicks your ass." Conquest's smile faded. He raised his hand and brought it down sharply. "Kill them all." Everything exploded into motion. Mark shot toward Conquest like a missile, his body a blur. Nolan went for one of the other Viltrumites while Thetis launched himself at a third. The coalition guards opened fire on the 2 remaining invaders, but the Viltrumites were already out of the chamber, flying toward the city. "Alan." Thetis barked mid-combat. "Take one down." Alan hesitated, fear creeping up his spine. "Are you kidding me? I got destroyed last time." "You're stronger than you think. You can take them on now." Thetis shouted before slamming his opponent into a wall. Alan gulped, then soared out of the chamber. He spotted one of the fleeing Viltrumites careening through the skies of Telescria, blasting through a building like paper. Civilians screamed, chaos erupting in the streets. "You 2-eyed monkey!" Alan roared. "Take this!" He punched the Viltrumite across the jaw. To his surprise, the impact sent the soldier spinning, blood spraying from his nose. Alan blinked at his own fist, dumbfounded. Then grinned. "All right then." Meanwhile, Mark and Conquest collided midair with the force of a small explosion. Their arms locked as they pushed against each other, neither yielding. But Conquest's robotic arm began to groan and warp under the pressure of Mark's strength. With a scream of rage, Conquest shoved backward, retreating midair. Mark hovered calmly. "I'll ask one more time. Leave. Now." "You think you've already won?" Conquest sneered, furious. "I was holding back. I wanted to savor it." Conquest flew at him, throwing everything he had into a brutal barrage of punches. Mark parried every strike, barely moving. He ducked one punch, spun, and slammed his elbow into Conquest's side, denting his ribs. Conquest roared, and Mark ended it. With a flash of speed, Mark chopped off Conquest's robotic arm with a Viltrumite chop, then slashed across his stomach with a sharp motion of his hand. Blood and viscera spilled out as Conquest's eyes widened. Before he could scream, Mark planted a heavy fist into his temple. Conquest hit the ground like a meteor. Unconscious. Broken. Mark turned, scanning for his father. Nolan had just driven a stone pillar through the Viltrumite he was fighting, knocking him unconscious. Across the chamber, Thetis stood over his enemy's unconscious body, his fist still coated in gore from the hole he put in his opponent's stomach. Mark flew off toward the city where the last two Viltrumites were causing havoc. One of them was being overwhelmed by coalition forces, who were shooting at him. Mark just dove down from the sky, his boots landing directly on the soldier's back with a spine-shattering crack. The body went limp, and Mark threw it over his shoulder. Nearby, Alan was locked in combat with the last Viltrumite. The fight was obvious. Alan was winning. The Viltrumite was bruised and bloodied, but Alan was barely scratched. Still, Mark acted fast before Alan could deal the finishing blow. His eyes lit up, and a searing beam of heat shot through the Viltrumite's back, rendering him unconscious. Alan staggered back. You stopped me. I had him." Mark landed beside him, the second unconscious Viltrumite slung over his shoulder. "I don't want them to die. They can be reformed." "They were trying to kill you." Alan shouted. "Trying to kill everyone." "They're still my people," Mark said firmly. "And if I'm going to rule them one day, I'm not going to weaken the Empire before I have a chance to change it." Alan stared at him. "That's insane." "Maybe. But this is what leadership means. Mercy when you can afford it. Ruthlessness and power when you need it." Mark flew back to the coalition chambers, Alan following reluctantly. He dropped the two unconscious Viltrumites beside the others. "Thetis," Mark said. "Do you have a ship ready? One with medical chambers? We're going to Viltrum." Thetis stood tall, his cloak billowing faintly in the breeze of the Coalition's launch bay. Before him stood Mark, Nolan, and a handful of trusted Coalition pilots. The 5 unconscious Viltrumite captives were held in medical chambers on the ship, unconscious and healing from their wounds. "I hope the next time we meet," Thetis said, "it will be during a time of peace between our peoples." Mark nodded. "That's what I'm aiming for." Thetis's tone hardened slightly. "Which is why I'm sending someone with you. A representative." He turned toward Alan. Alan blinked. "Wait, what?" "You brought them to us. You've seen their strength. I trust your eye, Alan. If things go south, I need someone I trust to get out alive and report back." Alan's singular eye darted between Mark, Nolan, and Thetis. Right. No pressure, huh?" He sighed and walked up the ramp, muttering under his breath, "I swear, I didn't sign up to spend more time with Viltrumites." The doors sealed shut behind them, and the Coalition vessel blasted off, angling sharply toward the stars. As the ship soared through the silence of space, Nolan sat across from Mark in the common room, the soft hum of the engine surrounding them. "You know," Nolan said with a small smile, "I always imagined bringing you to Viltrum one day, after you got your powers. I had this whole idea of watching you take your first step on the soil of our homeworld." Mark let out a soft chuckle. "Well, it's a good thing I got them late, then. Otherwise, I might have ended up a proper Viltrumite zealot." He said it lightly, but internally, Mark couldn't help but reflect on it. Would he have still clung to his morals, the memories of his past life, if he'd been raised under Viltrum's warlike ideals from the start? He'd seen other evil versions of himself in alternate timelines. So it was some food for thought. Nolan nodded. It was a blessing in disguise. I stayed on Earth long enough to unlearn some things, and you, well, you became more than I ever expected. There was a pause between them. A comfortable one. Then Nolan asked, "How's the device coming for your mother?" Mark's face brightened slightly. "It's done. It can completely halt her aging process. But I haven't given it to her yet." "Why not?" "Two reasons. One, she's pregnant right now. I don't know how the anti-aging stasis would affect the baby. And two." Mark hesitated. "I might have something better in mind." Nolan tilted his head. "Better?" "I want to give her powers. Not just prolonging her life, but also making her strong like us. Probably even stronger than you." Nolan's brows furrowed. "You're talking about turning her into a Viltrumite?" Mark shook his head. "No. A Kryptonian." Nolan blinked. "Come again." "You remember the device that gave me my powers? From the Flaxen dimension?" Nolan nodded slowly. "Yes." "Well, it's called the Codex, and it stores the entire genetic blueprint of a race called the Kryptonians. Their planet exploded a long time ago, and when the Codex fused with me, I became a hybrid. My body can metabolize yellow sun radiation, enhance my Viltrumite powers, and grant me more abilities: heat vision, enhanced intelligence, and heightened perception. It's what makes me so overpowered." Nolan leaned back in his seat, clearly trying to process everything. "So you're saying you can use that codex to make your mother like you?" "Exactly. She'd get the same benefits. And the longer she absorbs yellow sunlight, the longer she'll live. She could outlive even Viltrumites if she wanted to. No aging. No frailty. Just more time." Nolan looked amazed. "How did a race that strong go extinct?" Mark exhaled. "Their planet orbited a red sun. Kryptonians can't absorb energy from red sunlight. So while they were extraordinary under a yellow sun, they were normal, less fragile than humans, on their own planet. When Krypton exploded, they were wiped out. I found their legacy in the Flaxen dimension." "That's humbling," Nolan said. "To think a race like that vanished. They kind of sound like the Viltrumites. Even down to experiencing an extinction-level event, although we managed to survive." Mark sat back. "Yeah, they seem so similar to Viltrumites that I had an idea. What if I used the Codex to make the Viltrumites stronger? Not just better fighters, but more intelligent." "You'd use Kryptonian DNA to enhance Viltrumites?" Nolan asked, stunned. Mark nodded. "Call them Kryptomites, maybe? Or Viltrunians." Nolan snorted at the last name. "Sounds ridiculous." "Maybe. But think about it. We'd be smarter than ever. With longer lives. This new strength and intelligence would be used to bring peace all throughout the universe. Since we wouldn't need to conquer other planets for their resources and go about different ways of gaining them with our new powers." Nolan stared at him, awestruck. "You really do mean to rebuild the Empire?" "I do. And the first Viltrumite I want to enhance," Mark added with a sly grin, "is you." "Me?" Nolan laughed, surprised. "Why?" "The Emperor can't have a weak dad. And I can't give it to Mom first and let her watch you wither while she thrives." Nolan rubbed his face, clearly overwhelmed. "Well, I guess it'd be embarrassing to have a weak father. Can't make it worse by being outlived by my wife, too." Mark chuckled. "Exactly." At that moment, Alan walked in from the helm. "Hey, we're about to arrive at Viltrum." Mark and Nolan stood and moved to the viewport. The descending door of the ship opened as they hovered over the landing pad. Mark paid homage to one of the greatest phrases he'd ever heard. "All right, maximum effort." The ship touched down on a smooth, silver platform. 3 figures descended from the sky in perfect unison. Lucan, Thula, and Anissa. They had healed well since their last encounter. No signs of their prior defeat remained, but the tension in the air was thick. Anissa stepped forward, posture confident. "Follow us. The Grand Regent is waiting." As Mark stepped down, he He couldn't help but notice the way Anissa's eyes lingered on him. It seemed like she was showing him interest. He didn't comment on it, walking alongside Nolan and Alan. Lucan followed at their rear, clearly bristling at Nolan's presence. Mark didn't miss the way he glared at his father. Nolan, on the other hand, just smirked. They passed towering corridors, engraved with murals of ancient Viltrumite battles and legendary victories. The Empire had pride, no doubt. But the energy was cold and unyielding. Finally, they arrived at a set of massive stone doors. Anissa reached forward and pushed them open with little effort. Inside was the throne chamber. And on that throne sat Thrag. A mountain of muscle and menace, 6 feet 10 inches and 400 pounds, draped in a regal red cloak trimmed with white fur. His eyes were as sharp as his hairline. "It seems that Dog, Conquest, failed," he said with venom. "So, the traitors return." Mark stepped forward, unfazed. "I'm not a traitor. I was never part of this empire. But I've come to claim the right to change it." Thrag's gaze narrowed. "You wish to challenge me?" Mark nodded. "Yup, for the throne." Thrag chuckled. "You haven't even been alive a full century, and you think you're fit to rule?" "I do." He turned his eyes to Nolan. "This is your fault. You raised a fool." Nolan stepped forward. "No. I raised a better Viltrumite than I ever was." Thrag's face darkened. "So be it. He has the right to challenge me. Viltrumite laws dictate that the throne may be challenged through combat ever since the heirs to Argal went missing. To the death, or until mercy is granted." He raised a hand. "Bring him to the Colosseum." Mark was led away. Nolan was taken to the viewing chamber. Anissa followed Mark, stepping into his waiting chamber. Mark raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to go over the rules." She leaned in, unintentionally protruding her bust rack. "No weapons. Just natural might. You fight until one is dead, or the stronger spares the lesser. No surrender." Mark gave a light nod and smiled. "I understand. And I don't plan on losing." She held his gaze for a second longer, a little phased at his smile. "We'll see." She turned and left. Moments later, the bell rang. And Mark walked into the arena. Standing across from him, shedding his regal cloak and handing it to another Viltrumite, was Thrag. The announcer's voice echoed across the Colosseum. For the first time in a millennium, a challenge has been issued for the throne of Viltrum. The Traitorborn, or the Grand Regent. Who shall rule? The few Viltrumites who were on the planet watched in silence. The bell rang again. Mark and Thrag launched themselves at each other. And the battle for the Empire began. Mark and Thrag launched themselves at each other. Their initial clash sent a shockwave rippling through the arena, a testament to the immense power both combatants wielded. Mark had clashed with powerful opponents before, but Thrag was different. His strength, his precision, and the way he moved made it obvious that he was much stronger than the rest. This was someone who had refined his combat technique over thousands of years and become the strongest Viltrumite in history. Mark could feel it in every strike. Thrag wasn't wasting a single movement, every punch aimed for a vital point. His neck, his solar plexus, his heart. Anywhere that might cripple or kill a lesser opponent. But Mark wasn't a lesser opponent. Mark allowed some of these blows to land, just to see what the guy was working with. And as expected, they didn't hurt. But he recognized that if they were equal in strength, speed, and durability, Thrag's technique could have overwhelmed him and caused serious damage. Still, Mark wasn't going to let the old man run the show for much longer. He had to show the people why he was fit to rule all right, he muttered under his breath, shifting his stance. Deciding to shift tactics, Mark adopted a boxing stance, a style he hadn't utilized at all since gaining his powers. It was the first martial art he'd ever learned when he realized he was in the invincible universe. He hadn't used it ever since he got his powers, since his raw strength and speed were always enough to get the job done. Something he'll have to fix in the future. He didn't want to become like Superman, who always relied on his powers, but he realized it was hard to find someone to practice against at full strength. Sparring was the best way to get better, and while he had his Invincibots, they were too fragile for him. Maybe I should contact an alternate version of me to spar against. Whatever, I'm getting distracted. Focus on the fight. Mark ducked under a sharp hook from Thrag and slipped in close, landing a quick body shot that made the larger Viltrumite grunt. Mark could feel Thrag's bones creak beneath his fists as he hammered into Thrag's ribs and stomach while dodging and weaving with the ease of someone who drilled this for hours in a gym on Earth. The Viltrumites watching were stunned at how good of a fight Mark was putting up against Thrag. Many believed he would just get killed, but Mark was putting him on the back burner. Thrag snarled, clearly thrown off by Mark's sudden shift in style. Smart as he was, Thrag wasn't going to play Mark's game for long. He growled, spread his arms wide, and rocketed upward into the sky. Mark followed, breaking through the clouds just behind him. They hovered for a moment, facing each other under the bright light of Viltrum's sun. Thrag scowled, blood running from a cut near his temple. "You're good," he admitted, voice gravelly. "Better than I expected." Mark grinned. "I told you I was coming for the throne. Best believe I'll have the power to back it up." "I am. But don't get cocky, boy. When I'm done with you, your traitorous father and that mongrel he bred with will be next." Thrag taunted, trying to get under Mark's skin. Mark's eyes narrowed. Insulting his mother crossed a line. "You shouldn't have said that," he replied coldly. Thrag barely had time to register the movement before Mark drove into him like a human missile, both fists extended. The impact sent a shockwave through the upper atmosphere. Thrag's body crumpled around the hit, ribs crunching, blood flying from his mouth. Mark didn't stop. He kept pushing, spearing Thrag down through the sky. They crashed into the earth with a deafening boom, carving out a crater nearly 20 meters deep. Mark shot back up, grabbed Thrag by the ankle, and hurled him high into the air like a ragdoll. And then the real fun began. Mark blurred into motion, zipping from one side of the sky to the other, punching Thrag around like a volleyball. He hit so fast and so hard that to the watching Viltrumites below, it looked like there were a dozen marks surrounding Thrag at once. They couldn't believe what they were watching. Eventually, Mark caught Thrag midair and spun, launching him like a cannonball back down into the Colosseum floor. The ground shook on impact. Mark hovered above, X-ray vision scanning Thrag's injuries. Broken left arm, a fracture in his right, multiple cracked ribs, and some internal bleeding. The guy was wrecked. "Yield, Thrag," he muttered. "I am showing you mercy. You have been beaten." From within the crater, Thrag stirred. Then he rose. Thrag staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth, left arm dangling uselessly at his side. And yet, he kept walking. He looked up at Mark with wild eyes. "I will not be defeated by a child barely a century old," Thrag said, panting. He was caked in his own blood and sweat, but he moved forward through pure determination and force of will. Thrag roared, charging forward on trembling legs. With all the strength he had left, he swung a desperate punch. One of the strongest punches he had ever thrown toward Mark's chest, and screamed as his own arm snapped on contact, with bone peeking out through the muscle and lots of blood gushing out. He kneeled in pain. Taking the opportunity, Mark delivered one final punch to his head, causing Thrag's eyes to roll back. Silence. Then a whisper from the announcer's booth. "The winner, and the next Emperor of Viltrum, Mark Grayson." A moment passed. Then another. And then, one by one, the Viltrumites dropped to their knees. Mark stood there staring at the heads bowing before him. Even his father knelt, though Mark could tell Nolan was holding back a proud smile. "Stand," he said. "Some of you may know that my father was stationed on Earth, where I was born and raised. And that while there, his father's value on life had changed. Well, I will be bringing this change to Viltrum to lead it to a better future than the path it is currently on. With such a low population, and most of the universe fearing and plotting against us, I will bring change to Viltrum and make it better than it was before," Mark proclaimed. Then, from the crowd, a shout, "For the Empire!" More joined in. "For the Empire! For the Empire!" 2 weeks passed in a blur. Viltrum was alive with movement. A massive ship was being fueled and prepped for launch to Earth, and Viltrumites who were stationed across the universe were ordered to return home. When the news of Viltrum's change in leadership was spread to the returning Viltrumites, many questioned it at first, while others outright denied it. But that was until they saw the recording of the battle. Where they saw Thrag, the unchallenged Grand Regent for over 2 millennia, broken in a crater while Mark stood over him without so much as a scratch. Dissent died quickly after that. But there was something else, too, that made everyone more obedient. The reveal that Mark was the grandson of Emperor Argal. It started during a conversation with General Craig and his father in the Imperial Archives. Mark had been studying Viltrumite history, with General Craig being one of his new advisors, helping him. General Craig was old enough to survive the Great Purge and the Scourge virus, so he was a good source of historical information. They were going over history when General Craig brought up the search for Argal's heirs. After the Scourge virus, Craig said, arms folded behind his back, we just assumed Argal's bloodline was lost. However, Mark knew this was not the case. So he put on an act to get this information. So, Dad, were you ever tested for Emperor Argal's bloodline? Nolan looked confused, eyebrows furrowed. Not that I know of. I mean, maybe when I was a kid. I was born around the time of Lord Argal's death. I don't really remember if I did get tested. Putting on a smile that looked like a scammer's, Mark just said, well, you should go get tested now. I mean, just in case, you know. Nolan looked even more confused and said, I don't see a reason for it. I mean, you already beat Thrag, and it's not like just because I take the test I'll be declared an heir to Lord Argal. Cut to the testing lab. A Viltrumite scientist stared at the results on a glowing screen and nearly fell out of his chair. Oh my god, he whispered. You're Emperor Argal's son. Nolan blinked. Ha. Well, what do you know? News spread fast. Thrag, who was recovering in a Viltrumite hospital, crushed his bed's armrest when he heard. His jaw clenched. The muscles in his arms trembled with suppressed rage. All those years of searching. All the time spent trying to rebuild a broken empire, and the heir walks in and takes all my hard work after a single battle. He hated it. But there was nothing he could do. He had lost the duel. After another week, it was time for all remaining Viltrumites in the universe to leave the planet. Mark stepped onto the command deck of the massive Imperial vessel. He wore the traditional garb of the Viltrumite Emperor, a crimson upper body suit, a long white robe beneath, and the white fur-lined, red mantle that once belonged to Argal and Thrag. The Viltrumites gathered before him, waiting. This is a new era, he began, his voice steady and powerful. One where Viltrum will stop being a force of conquest and start being a force of unity. Our strength is not to be wasted on meaningless wars for territories not needed. With great power comes great responsibility. And we're going to use our power to build a better universe. He looked out over the crowd of warriors, many of whom had known nothing but conquest their entire lives. We are heading to Earth, my home. But before that, we will stop at Telescria and end the war with the Coalition. We are no longer conquerors from this day forward. The crowd roared with approval. They now followed Mark, thinking he had inherited Emperor Argal's wisdom, which was the reason they followed Argal. Mark took one last look at his people and gave a final command. Set a course for Telescria. News of Thrag's defeat had spread to the Coalition. The moment Thrag was defeated, Alan flew to Telescria to deliver the news. As the flagship reached Telescria's orbit, the sight alone was enough to send the entire planet into panic. Coalition citizens screamed in fear, broadcasting emergency alerts as 3 Viltrumites exited the massive ship. It was Mark, Nolan, and Anissa. Anissa flew close to Mark's side. She had effectively cemented herself as his right hand. Equal parts advisor, bodyguard, and enforcer. He knew what she was really doing, but he was a little uncomfortable at first with how she followed him everywhere. She even went as far as to follow him into the bathroom, but now he barely even minded her. You don't have to be beside me all the time, you know, Mark said without turning. I'm your guard, Anissa replied smoothly. It's my place. They were brought straight to the newly rebuilt Coalition Council Hall. The damage from Conquest's earlier attack had been repaired with impressive speed. Alan stood near the front of the room, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He waved excitedly the moment he saw Mark. Hey, you made it. I told these guys all about what you did. Showed him that insane fight too. Man, you really wrecked him. Anissa stepped forward immediately, voice sharp. Bow when addressing Emperor Mark. Alan flinched. Whoa, okay. But Mark just found Anissa's enthusiasm funny and waved a hand. "It's fine. He's a friend." He then smiled at Alan. "Hope you got my good side in that footage." Alan gave him a double thumbs up. Across the chamber, Thetis rose from his seat, cloak billowing behind him. "Welcome back, Mark. Or rather, Emperor Mark." Mark gave a respectful nod. "Thetis. Your reign will change everything," Thetis continued. "With you as emperor, there is hope for true peace between the Viltrum Empire and the Coalition." Mark addressed the rest of the council, who couldn't believe what they were hearing. The conquering ways of the old empire are finished. There was practically no reason for it in the first place. Viltrum will be stronger than ever, and instead of promoting domination, we plan to promote unity across the universe. From this day forward, we will bring peace to every planet we've ever touched. And we start with an alliance with the Coalition. Applause followed. Alan clapped hard. Even a few more skeptical council members began to stand in support. Until it happened. "Death to the Viltrumites!" A voice cried out from the stands. A grenade hit the floor with a clang, bouncing once, twice, then a hiss. Green smoke exploded outward in thick, rapid tendrils, clouding the air with a sickly hue. The smoke traveled to Mark, Nolan, and Anissa. But, before Nolan and Anissa could even react, Mark took a step forward, before taking in a deep breath and sucking in all the smoke. Then, laughter from the traitorous council member, a Mobian from Mobius 6 named Zwaberg. "You fool." Zwaberg cackled. "You breathed it in. That was an enhanced version of the Scourge virus. Thetis thought he could hide it, but I had one of the scientists who made it bring it to me. You Viltrumites will all die for your transgressions, and there will never be peace until all of you are dead." Mark dropped to a knee, a faint burning sensation simmering in his chest. Nolan rushed forward, but Mark raised a hand and shook his head. Nolan froze mid-step. While Anissa, who was initially stunned, soon turned angry and grabbed Zwaberg by the neck, preparing to kill him. Anissa then heard Mark command, "Stop." She looked back at Mark when he did something completely unexpected. Mark let out a massive burp. The sound echoed loudly and awkwardly through the chamber. "Ugh. That gave me some serious heartburn," said Mark while dusting off his shirt. It seems like he had been completely unaffected by the biological weapon against his Viltrumite half. With a look of sheer disbelief, he just said, How are you okay?" "I'm just built different," Mark said, but then his father got closer to check on him. "Seriously, don't get near me. I absorbed it all, but until I burn it out completely, I'm a walking biohazard to other Viltrumites." Drawing on his Kryptonian air magi abilities, Mark created an aura of energy around himself. A protective air bubble formed, isolating the virus within his own space. "Let him go," he said to Anissa, his voice steady. She had the traitor locked in a tight chokehold. Anissa didn't loosen her grip. Her eyes narrowed. "He tried to kill you." "I know," Mark replied calmly. "But I understand why." Zwaberg stared at him, anger still evident. "What?" Mark turned to face him fully. "You're angry. You're scared. The Viltrumites have left a trail of destruction across the stars. I don't blame you for hating us." Zwaberg's expression shifted. His anger faltered for just a moment. "But that's why I'm here. That's why we're all here now," Mark continued. "This is our chance to change. To do better. And that begins by choosing a little something called mercy." Zwaberg was still taken into custody, but the message had been made loud and clear. The new leader of the Viltrumites was completely different. He looked toward Nolan and Anissa. "Head back to the ship. I need to take a sunbath." "A what?" Anissa asked, blinking. Without another word, Mark blasted off into the sky. Nolan and Anissa stared after him for a beat. Did he just say, sunbath? Anissa asked. Nolan sighed and brought his hand to his face. Yeah. He does that sometimes. Always leaving people confused. Mark sat at the helm of the Viltrumite Imperial ship, one leg crossed over the other, flipping through a thick old book on Viltrumite history. The pages were worn and dense with text, but he soaked it in quickly. His eyes scanned faster than a normal person could ever dream of, taking in centuries of militaristic customs, political hierarchies, and the harsh rites of Viltrumite tradition. Nolan stood to his right, arms crossed, quietly watching his son read. Occasionally, he answered a question or pointed out a footnote. Anissa hovered close by as well, silent but attentive, seemingly more interested in Mark's focus than the book itself. "You really read all this stuff when you were growing up?" Mark asked, raising an eyebrow without looking up. Nolan grunted. "Not all of it. Just the parts about war. The rest was fluff." "Right. Because political strategy and diplomacy are so fluffy," Mark muttered. Before Nolan could respond, Mark's head twitched to the side. He went still. His eyes narrowed as a faint, high-pitched pulse hit his ears, a frequency only someone with his hearing could catch. It was coming from his wrist. The communicator he'd given to Eve and Amber. A distress ping. Then came the voice. Faint, but unmistakably Eve's. "Mark, please, we need you." Mark shot up, the book falling to the floor with a soft thud. "Eve," he said sharply, already moving toward the ship's airlock. "She's in trouble." Nolan's eyes widened as he followed behind. "What happened?" "I don't know yet," Mark said. "But I'm not waiting to find out. You stay here. Keep the Viltrumites heading to Earth. Make sure they land on the moon, not the planet directly. We don't need global panic." Nolan gave a nod. "Understood." Anissa stepped forward without hesitation. "I'm coming with you, sire. In case you need backup." Mark gave her a quick glance. "Fine. But try to keep up." They reached the airlock in seconds. The moment it opened, Mark launched forward, slicing through the vacuum of space with Anissa close behind. The ship would have taken a few days to reach Earth at sublight speed, but Mark wasn't in the mood for waiting. With the speed they were flying, they'd be there in less than a minute. Descending like a meteor, Mark tore through the upper atmosphere of Earth, the air around him igniting in a corona of blazing fire. He zeroed in on the epicenter of frequency and saw the city of Chicago in ruins. Entire blocks leveled, skyscrapers toppled, fires blazing out of control. Craters dotted the urban landscape, some still smoking from recent impact. At the center of it all, sprawled among broken concrete and debris, lay heroes, dozens of them. Capes Incorporated members, Fight Force, even Brit. Some groaning. Some unmoving. Some were barely alive. "Eve," Mark whispered. He found her. She was crumpled beside a shattered wall, bloodied, her arm bent at an impossible angle. Bone jutted through her skin. She was unconscious, barely breathing. Mark dropped beside her, his expression torn between rage and desperation. He used his super hearing and heard her heart beating, which was good. Mark summoned a soft green aura through his hands. The air magic flowed outward, coiling around Eve like mist before condensing over her shattered limb. With delicate control, he knit bone, tissue, and skin together. Her breathing evened. Then, slowly, her eyes fluttered open. "Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You came." "I always will," he said, hugging her tightly. She clung to him, trembling, before pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. Her lips met his in a kiss filled with relief and love. Behind them, Anissa landed, taking in the sight. For a moment, her chest ached with jealousy and longing. But she said nothing. Mark broke the kiss and looked into Eve's eyes. "What happened? Who did this?" Her voice was filled with fear. "It's a being called Omnipotus. He called himself the World Shaper. He came here to consume Earth's energy. Said he's already devoured multiple worlds across different universes and that he has reality manipulation abilities and cosmic strength." The name stirred something vague in Mark's memory. Normally, his brain would instantly recall any memory down to the smallest details, but he barely remembered Omnipotus before he even gained his powers, so his memories weren't as clear as back then. "I'll stop him," Mark said. "You can't do it alone. His powers allow him to warp reality. My powers can counter it a bit, but he's too strong physically for me." Mark helped her to her feet. "Then we'll fight together." He turned to Anissa. "Help the wounded and save who you can." She nodded and took off immediately. Mark pressed 2 fingers to his communicator. Cecil. Are you there? Cecil's voice crackled through. Thank God, Mark. It's very bad right now. Most of the Guardians are down, and Omnipotus is tearing through the city. We're mobilizing everything we've got. Have your people move the injured around here. My companion will assist them. I'll stop Omnipotus. Go get him, Invincible. Mark ended the transmission, and both he and Eve launched themselves toward the direction of the battle. Mark streaked through the ruined skies of Chicago like a bullet of vengeance, his eyes glowing with heat, his muscles tight with rage. The deeper into the city he flew, the worse the devastation became. It was a war zone. Whole city blocks had been flattened into jagged debris. Cars were flipped and melted, their metal shells twisted like paper. Craters pockmarked the ground as though meteor showers had rained from above. And then, he saw them. The Guardians. The sight stopped him cold midair. Hundreds of identical duplicates lay scattered across the battlefield, most unmoving and dead. One copy was twitching slightly but unconscious. Shrinking Ray lay nearby, her body mangled, legs twisted beyond recognition. Rex was down, one arm missing completely from the elbow down. Blood pooled around his motionless form, with some leaking from his head. And Monster Girl. His heart stopped. Amanda was heavily injured. Half her face was missing, scorched down to bone. Her chest had a crater punched into it, ribs splintered, and organs exposed. Her monstrous form hadn't reverted, and he saw that her heart was beating slowly. That meant she was still alive. Barely. Amanda. Mark muttered, instantly diving toward her. He didn't even register the robot drone nearby, which was crawling pathetically toward her without its 2 legs and left arm and with its voice box crushed. Mark knelt beside her, his hands trembling as they hovered above her ruined form. A gentle glow formed over her destroyed face and chest as Mark poured air magic into her system, knitting tissue and repairing bone. But almost immediately, he hit a wall. What? He muttered, focusing harder. The light wavered. His healing faltered. No, no, no. Darn it. He focused again. But something pushed back. There was a resistance. His healing energy was being rejected. Behind him, Eve floated toward him, concerned by the face he was making. Mark. What's wrong? He looked back over his shoulder, panic creeping into his voice. It's her curse. It's tied to her powers, and it's not reacting well to another person's magic. My healing magic, it's being pushed out. Eve's eyes widened. Is she? She's alive, barely. But I can't keep her that way for long. Not like this. Mark stared at Amanda's face, his thoughts racing. Back when he developed an anti-aging solution for her curse, he'd intentionally left the core of it untouched. It was what made her who she was. He could have used the purifying aspect of his air magic to completely get rid of her monster form, but he hadn't. But now that same curse that gave her powers was rejecting his magic. I need to stabilize her manually, he said. Eve, stay here. I'm taking Amanda to Invincible Incorporated. Eve nodded but argued. Go help Amanda, but I'm heading back to the fight. Mark activated his telekinesis, lifting Amanda's unconscious body into the air with gentle care. All right, fine, but don't get hurt again. Then he turned to the sky. Anissa, he shouted. A blur shot into view, and Anissa landed beside him. Yes, sire. I need you to assist Eve and the Guardians and support the defense. Eve will guide you. I'm taking Monster Girl to get medical attention. Anissa nodded, her face was stern. Understood. I'll keep her safe. Without another word, Mark shot into the sky, flying eastward at a blur, carrying Amanda with him like she was made of glass. As he disappeared into the horizon, Anissa turned back to Eve. Point me to the bastard. Eve smirked, already shaping constructs with her glowing pink hands. That way. Mark flew to Invincible Incorporated, and when he entered, he headed towards one of the medical bays he had set up just in case. Dozens of Invincibles snapped to life at his arrival. Secure her into one of the medical chambers. Mark ordered, voice firm. Stabilize her vitals. I want one of you looking for magical and medicinal herbs to boost her monster form's recovery capabilities. Use the data we gathered from testing her monster form to find the best herbs that'll help. One of the bots saluted and zipped out of the room. She'll hold, he told himself. She'll be okay. He closed his eyes for a moment. And then, the immense rage returned. He stood tall. And then he turned back to the ruined skyline in the distance. Omnipotus was in the heart of the crater now, swatting aside heroes like they were paper dolls. Black Samson had powered down from his amped state that he achieved when he saw some of the Guardians going down. He had an electrical aura around him and was one of the only reasons the battle lasted so long, but now he was unconscious. Bulletproof and Tech Jacket, the last remaining heroes from the initial group, were both out cold. Anissa and Eve were the only ones still standing. Anissa had blood streaming from her brow as she exchanged blows with Omnipotus. The World Shaper laughed, swatting her like an insect and sending her flying across the skyline. A massive warhammer made from Eve's offensive mode struck him across the jaw, and he stumbled slightly. It was a good hit, but not good enough. Omnipotus snarled. He raised one hand and conjured a spear of jagged dark metal. He hurled it toward Eve like lightning. Her suit morphed into its defensive mode with dual shields, giant rectangular plates in defensive formation. But, with a flick of his hand, Omnipotus warped the shields, tunneling the spear straight through her defenses. It pierced her stomach. She gasped, collapsing midair before falling. Mark caught her before she hit the ground. No, no, no. He whispered, cradling her in his arms. Eve, stay with me. But before he could heal her, a pink glow enveloped her. Her atoms deconstructed and then reconstructed. Within seconds, she was whole again, naked and unconscious, but alive. Mark exhaled shakily and wrapped his Emperor's cloak around her. Anissa, he shouted. She flew over, bruised and battered. Yes, sire. Take her. Keep her safe. Anissa took Eve gently into her arms, holding her like a princess. It should be me fighting. Not, no. I'll handle this. Mark's voice dropped low. Omnipotus sneered. Oh? Another bug comes to die. Mark looked at him. I see the future, he said quietly, his hair shadowing his eyes. And in it, you die today. And then he moved. A single punch cracked the sound barrier tenfold. It shattered the air, cracked the sky, and launched Omnipotus across the horizon. Anissa shielded Eve from the blast, grabbing the unconscious bodies of the other heroes in one arm while cradling Eve in the other. She stared in wide-eyed awe at the massive crater where Omnipotus had once stood. Mark was already gone, chasing his enemy. Omnipotus continued soaring through the sky like a meteor, unconscious from Mark's previous punch. His body finally jerked as his eyes snapped open, awareness rushing back into him. That strike, it knocked me out? He clenched his jaw, twisting his body midair. Reality warped around him with a shimmer as he stabilized his flight. Looking down, he spotted Mark hurtling toward him, eyes glowing with focused rage. You shall die. Omnipotus bellowed, extending both hands and firing a red and black beam of condensed energy. It crackled like lightning and screamed through the air before striking Mark square in the chest. Mark didn't expect it to hurt, but it did. A searing pain tore through his chest as he screamed, the beam blasting him down toward the earth like a missile. He crashed violently into an old runway, tearing up concrete and steel in a thunderous explosion. Omnipotus floated down calmly, holding a jagged staff formed from the same crackling energy as the beam. He sneered as he saw Mark trying to push himself up. Mark groaned and placed a hand on his chest. His suit was scorched away, and underneath, his skin was burned and bleeding. The pain made him wince, even as his body began knitting itself back together thanks to his Viltrumite and Kryptonian healing. What the hell was that? Mark muttered, breath ragged. Omnipotus grinned. That was a refined stream of the cosmic energy that I've absorbed from planets across dimensions. I fused it with my reality-bending abilities to enhance its destructive force. It disintegrates everything it touches. Looks like I didn't use enough power to finish you the first time. Let me fix that. He raised his hand to unleash another blast, but before he could release it, Mark was already moving. A flash. Mark reappeared in front of him and delivered 2 vicious punches to Omnipotus's face, followed by a knee straight into his jaw that launched him upward. Recovering midair, Omnipotus growled and extended both arms. 5 copies of himself materialized out of nothing, surrounding Mark in a perfect circle. The air distorted from their sudden appearance. Mark's eyes narrowed. So this is how he fights, mixing power with strategy using his manipulation abilities. The clones moved with intent, throwing calculated punches that Mark actually felt. Each hit was heavy, like getting smacked by chunks of a planet. They're not just illusions, Mark thought, weaving through them, barely dodging the coordinated attacks. They're real. And strong. Mark lashed out, catching one clone by the throat and slamming his fist through its chest. The body burst into mist. He fired his heat vision, sweeping across the battlefield, slicing through the remaining 4 clones with surgical precision. Then, silence. He looked to the real Omnipotus, who was now hunched over, glowing. Electricity crackled around his bulging muscles. His aura turned red and pink, the energy humming in the air like an angry swarm of bees. His white skin darkened to a bruised purple, and veins popped like cables underneath. "This trash is my full power," he growled, voice deeper, layered with echoing distortion. "This is what I become when I channel all the energy I've absorbed. I become a god." Mark, still breathing hard and bearing burns on his chest, scoffed. "Well, lucky me. I've been looking for a god to slay." He fired his heat vision, but Omnipotus blocked it with a shield formed from his aura. The beam ricocheted off harmlessly. Mark shot forward. Their fists met in a clash that shattered the sound barrier and sent out a ripple of force that leveled nearby trees and crumbled runway hangars. They traded blow after blow, too fast for anyone but themselves to track. Mark ducked under a wide hook and delivered a sharp uppercut to Omnipotus's ribs, causing the cosmic tyrant to grunt in pain. But Omnipotus retaliated with a spinning elbow that cracked Mark's cheekbone. Mark wiped the blood from his lip. His healing kicked in immediately, but Omnipotus didn't give him time to recover. He raised his hand, bending time around himself, accelerating his own movements. Mark's eyes widened. He's faster now, too fast. Punches rained down on him like meteors. Each one hurt. Not just physically, but on a deeper level, his molecules felt like they were vibrating apart from the destructive force imbued into each strike. "Enough." Mark yelled, catching both of Omnipotus's fists. He threw the arms aside and clapped his hands together with a thunderous boom. The shockwave ripped through the air, sending Omnipotus tumbling backward, blood leaking from his ears. Before Omnipotus could recover, Mark unleashed another blast of heat vision, slamming into his chest and launching him high into the sky. Mark chased after him, and when he caught up, he brought both fists down in a devastating hammer fist. Omnipotus plummeted like a meteor and crashed into an empty cargo plane. The resulting explosion lit up the night sky. Mark hovered above the wreckage, X-ray vision confirming no civilians were nearby. "Collateral damage I can fix, but I can't let him injure civilians." Out of the smoke, Omnipotus rose, wounds already sealing. His grin had returned. "You can't win. I shape reality. I am reality. You're just a strong ape." Mark's jaw clenched. "You're right about one thing, I'm strong." Omnipotus charged again. They clashed in a flurry of punches, each blow sending out waves of force. Mark dodged a sweeping leg kick and retaliated with a strike to Omnipotus's temple. Omnipotus recoiled, blood spurting from his mouth. Mark grabbed Omnipotus's face and fired twin heat beams into his eyes. Omnipotus screamed and swung wildly, using gravity manipulation to toss Mark aside like a ragdoll. Mark hit the ground, skidding across the tarmac, but rolled to his feet just in time to throw up a telekinetic barrier that blocked another destructive energy beam. Then he felt it, burns on his arms where the energy splashed past the shield. Still healing. Always healing. With a deep breath, he reached for the earth beneath them, calling on his Earth Magi affinity. 2 giant stone pillars rose up and slammed together, crushing Omnipotus in between. Mark flew in, but Omnipotus tore himself free, laughing, and summoned shadows that swarmed toward Mark. They clung to his skin like oil, burning even his Viltrumite Kryptonian durability. He flew higher, away from the shadows, then shouted, unleashing a telekinetic pulse that shredded the shadow creatures into smoke. Mark hovered, checking his body. The damage was already healing. But for the first time in a while, he was getting tired. Then he noticed something. Omnipotus's aura. It was flickering. He's burning through his energy reserves. Mark narrowed his eyes. That's it. He's strong but reckless. He can't sustain this level of power forever. Omnipotus lunged forward. Mark met him head-on, catching the incoming punch and slamming his forehead into Omnipotus's face, breaking his nose. He didn't stop. He threw a rapid series of punches, each more brutal than the last. Omnipotus tried to fight back, but Mark was relentless. Faster. Smarter. Angrier. You want to destroy my world? Hurt my people? Mark roared. You picked the wrong damn planet. Omnipotus screamed in frustration and unleashed a massive omnidirectional blast, vaporizing the area around them. Mark was thrown back, his body scorched again, but he got back to his feet, smoke rising from his shoulders. He looked up and froze. Omnipotus had changed again. This time, his aura was lashing wildly, the sky above darkening. I'm absorbing the planet's energy. Omnipotus declared, voice thunderous. I'll finish this battle and devour Earth in one go. Mark's heart sank. Damn it. I pushed him too far. Without another word, he rocketed toward Omnipotus, grabbed him mid-sentence, and launched both of them straight into the sky. They broke through the stratosphere, speeding past the clouds and into the void of space. Mark didn't stop. Omnipotus pounded against his body, but Mark clung on, flying them deeper and deeper into the vacuum, closer to the sun. Then Mark's skin began to glow. Omnipotus saw it too. What are you doing? Mark didn't answer. He focused, his body drawing in the solar energy and using up his own reserves. Every cell buzzed, charged with light and heat. I told you. I see the future, he said, voice calm but resolute. And in it, you die today. And with a primal roar, he detonated. A blinding solar flare burst from his body. The shock wave obliterated Omnipotus's energy field. Omnipotus screamed, trying to absorb the flare, but it was too fast. Too intense. Mark kept pushing. He poured every ounce of stored power into the blast, drawing on the sun's energy directly behind him. Omnipotus's body started to crack, splintering into light. No. I am a god, he bellowed. Mark's voice echoed one last time. Not anymore. With a final scream, Omnipotus was vaporized. Reality warped for a moment, and then went still. Mark, drained and glowing faintly, floated in silence. Every part of him ached. But he was alive. And Omnipotus wasn't. Then, a hand gripped his wrist. Mark's eyes snapped open to see Anissa, her expression filled with awe at how strong her emperor was. Was I out long? He asked telepathically. Only a few minutes, she replied, using her telepathy implant. Mark looked down at Earth. He saw no sign of Omnipotus. I told you you'd die today, he thought. Then he turned to Anissa. Let's go check on Eve. And Amanda, too. The battle was won and Invincible was cemented in Earth's history as one of the greatest heroes of all time. The silence of space was almost peaceful after the chaos that had just unfolded. Floating beside Mark, Anissa cast an occasional glance at him. The solar energy from the nearby sun slowly replenished the reserves he had just burned through. The damage from the battle had already begun healing. The cuts were closing, bruises fading, and the seared burns on his chest reduced to light marks. He really is something else, she thought, her eyes drifting to the powerful yet calm expression on his face. As they flew in synchronized formation, Anissa's voice broke the calm. May I ask something, sire? She said, her tone unusually reserved. Mark glanced at her briefly. Go ahead. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, back there, when you rushed to heal those two women, who among them is your mate? Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes remained on the path towards Earth, then he finally said, both. Anissa's posture stiffened, but she said nothing immediately. Her mind whirred with thoughts. Both. He's bonded to both women? I didn't think Earth had the same relationship values as Viltrum. But, that's not a bad thing. Then, as if choosing to seize the moment of privacy, she spoke again, this time a bit more boldly. Sire, would it be acceptable if I were to bear your children? Mark nearly stumbled mid-flight. He tilted in the air slightly before catching himself. Whoa. She turned to him, her face serious but her blue eyes searching. I only ask because I know the Empire needs to grow stronger. And I admire you. You're not just strong, but you're wise. And fair. Mark blinked, then unexpectedly let out a chuckle. Anissa raised an unimpressed brow at the sound. Sorry, he said, waving a hand. It's not that the question's funny, just, wow. Talk about timing. She folded her arms, her expression flat. You think I'm joking? No, Mark said, shaking his head. Not at all. I'm just saying, it's the first time someone's offered to have my kid while we're flying back from vaporizing a god. A faint smile tugged at her lips. So, is that a yes? Mark smiled softly. I'm not saying no. But maybe we could get to know each other more first. Spend time together. Talk. Maybe even, go on a date. Anissa frowned slightly. A what? Mark chuckled again. A date. It's something humans do when they're trying to connect. Usually starts with food and a conversation. She pondered that for a moment. We fought together. That's connecting. Sure, Mark said with a grin. But imagine doing that without punches and with dessert. Anissa let out a quiet huff, amused despite herself. Very well, Emperor. I will entertain this concept of a date. The two then continued flying towards the GDA, where Eve was with Mark, explaining what a date was in more detail as they went on.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.